Evening, everyone. Thank you all for joining. We are going to continue where we left off last week. Now, as you can see from the screen, I have added a few things, and we'll go through those in a minute. But it's still all pretty basic. We are still in the stages of just blocking out our internals of our carrier. Just with some simple primitives, just to get the scale right and figure out what rooms we need and what sort of interactions we need in those rooms. Excuse me, let me just get a little bit of water. And then sort of start flashing this out before we start looking at actual proper assets to fill these or to model these environments. This is all stand-in for now. What has changed this week, or what has been happening this week? That's a good question. The week went by really, really quickly for me. I hope everybody is safe and well with the pandemic and everything. Here in Australia, it is. Yeah, we're getting somewhere. My top of my head is being cut off. There we go. It's a bit better. So I really hope that for everybody watching, you are safe and in a good spot, and enjoying some game dev. That's one of the nice things about the times that we're living in right now. Lots of time at home and lots of time to spend behind computers doing cool stuff. What happened this week? A new version of Godot is out. We are still on a custom build here. So we're actually slightly behind the 3.2.3 release that was released yesterday or the day before. I think it's yesterday. A maintenance release with lots of small fixes in there. So if you are on Godot 3.2, go and download it, check it out, test it out, and see what you think of it, and provide feedback to the team. The more feedback we get, the more stable these builds get. That's all pretty cool. Hiya FECU, hiya SLX. Thank you both for joining tonight. So thinking about it, the Quest 2 was announced, first leaked. I'm wondering if it really was leaked or not, as the case may be. But I don't have one, not yet. Maybe someday, hopefully, we'll see. I joined an online like a sweepstakes. So who knows? Might get one that way. I'm pretty sure that eventually I'll get my hands on a Quest 2. It looks very interesting. A nice, good upgrade based on the Quest 1. Looks pretty compatible as well from everything that I've heard. So in theory, for all the people who are currently working on Quest 1 Godot games, and there are quite a few out there. It's quite busy on the XR Discord channel. So it does look like a popular platform for people to develop on. So hopefully that will mean a pretty smooth translation for games written for the Quest 1 to also run on the Quest 2, and maybe even make use of the extra performance that comes on the new Quest. That was pretty exciting news, I think. Looking forward to trying one out and seeing the difference between the Quest 1 and Quest 2. We'll see. Exciting. That's definitely for sure. Hi, Declan. How are you? As far as I'm aware, 3.2.3 is purely bug fixes. I don't think there's any features being added. I'm still hanging out for a small change that I need for the OpenXR plugin to work. So I'm hoping that that gets accepted. We try, or the team tries to not make any breaking changes in the 3.2 branch. So it is really all bug fixes. And I do believe there were one or two minor changes that could impact people. So I was reading about physics being one of them. So there's a small change in how the damping in rigid bodies work. Might affect us in some point in time, we'll see. But it sounded like just a a bit of tweaking. So it doesn't sound like it's going to have really big impacts on anybody's games. I think most people won't even notice unless they're being, it's being pointed out to them. The other big amount of work from what I've read is C#. There is a bunch of improvements on the C# support for Godot and bringing that to newer tool sets. I still have to test that out, to be honest. It's actually been on my list for a long time to get Godot up and running with C#, figuring out all the steps, potentially even doing a tutorial on getting set up with that. It's just I haven't gotten to it yet. I'm, as everybody knows, I'm happy with DG Script. That does it nicely for me. But I am a C++ programmer by origin, and I have done C# in my professional development life. My previous employer was pretty big on C# by the time that I left there. So yeah, it's a nice language. It's a good language, and seeing there is a large community out there of C# developers who wouldn't mind trying out Godot but aren't because of the lack of support. Obviously, having good C# support is potentially a way to grow the community. So yeah, it's something I definitely want to try and want to look at, and maybe at some point do some tutorials about as well. So. So the Quest, new Godot's out. I think that's about it as far as things that happened this week. So let's go back to our little space game and see what I have been up to. So as you can see, I am now down to 4 rooms that I have set up. And again, I can't stress this enough. This is all just blocking out levels. This is not what's going to be in the final game. It's purely to get a sense of dimensions and a sense of which rooms we need, and starting to put logic together to actually move around these rooms and get the functionality that we need for each room to actually work. And that's probably going to be a pretty long journey to begin with, because we're talking about the basics here first, interacting with the menus to to do setup of the game and to do the progression of the missions. So we need to be able to go from our bridge into our briefing room, sit through a briefing which will play out on the screen, and then when the briefing's finished, we go into the hangar, which is down here, where we can do some final setup of whatever ship that we're doing. So obviously I've got now our current ship as a placeholder just in there for for the visual side of it, but you might at some point get ship selection, and we need to have a mechanism for changing the ship that you set up. We need to have a mechanism for changing the weaponry that we have on the ships for the mission, and then obviously start the mission and go and load up the mission and fly the mission with our selected state. So that is purely for the progression of the missions. But then the idea, of course, also is to have a story element to the game, for which we need to be able to go to the other rooms that we defined. And do interaction with NPCs there. And that's going to be interesting because I've never built something like that before. So it's going to be interesting to see what challenges we run into and how we need to solve some of those things. For tonight, I want to finish some of these rooms, and I want to start on the code that lets us move from one room to another. And I might just do a temporary thing that once we are in the briefing room, that we there's obviously no briefing yet, but that we do have a button that substitute the ending of the briefing. We're now going to go and configure our mission, and then some sort of button in the hangar that actually allows us to load up our test scene, and we fly around in our test scene, so that we have all the dots joined in that respect. Because obviously there's nothing much to do in these rooms. Now, one of the things that I actually had a little eureka moment about an hour ago, finally. So at the end of last stream, I was pretty stumped on why my little view screen didn't work, and it turned out to be the dumbest of dumbest reasons. So when we go into our bridge, actually we can't access that from here. We just need to go and open up the test UI. You can see that I was working on this. Our problem turned out to be our cursor. So our cursor is an object. We're placing that wherever we're pointing, And it actually, because it's the top thing, because we want to draw it on the top of everything else, that was actually the object that was getting all the mouse events. So we weren't clicking on our button, we were clicking on our cursor, even though that isn't a button, that isn't, you know, it's just a rectangle. It's not a GUI object, not an interactive object, but it seems that it still is able to capture mouse events and react on them. So the simple solution here is to go into the mouse section over here, and then on the filter we just say ignore. And at that point in time, the mouse logic ignores the cursor, and we can actually do something on screen. Now, the thing that I haven't figured out, but that I'm also not too worried about, is why things slow down when I actually move my physical mouse. So I'm not quite sure why, whether that has something to do with the mouse capture or another reason. But it looks like as it's processing my my mouse events, it was really starting to slow stuff down. And I'm not quite sure yet what is the cause of that. We'll figure it out eventually. But if we run our little test environment, my camera is stuck. That's not good. Why is my camera stuck? Let's just take it out and plug it back in and see if that works. Oh, and that is probably on shape itself. So that was one of the last changes that I just made right before that. Let me just see if I can do something with my camera here. Camera. Cancel. That's weird. Well, that's what you get for a $20 cam thing, I guess. I'm actually going to go and just go to deactivate for now. Plug it back in. Let's see if that wants to work. Let's reactivate. All right. Hey, I'm moving. Haha. All right. There we go. Hey, Davies, and thanks for that terror. I have no idea how to pronounce your name. Sorry about that. Terror. Thanks for the warning about that. I had no idea that the camera was not working. It looks to be okay now, so I must have either dislodged it or maybe my $23 Amazon cam link thingy is finally not happy that it's basically always plugged into that computer and therefore always on, even though my camera is shut down. So yeah, I'm actually surprised it's worked as long as it has, and that it works as well as it does for a $23 little cam thingy. So, all right, let's see if I fix that problem properly. All right, let's have a look. Here we go. Oh, and of course I am starting the tracking in the wrong place. There we go. So we still got our doors that are opening, there. You can see that there's another screen inside of there. And now we can see that, you know, we can see that the button actually changed color as I hover over it. Now, where's my, here. Now when I press my trigger on my joystick, it's actually nicely reacting the way that it should. So we've got our trigger working properly. Of course, this guy still works, so that's all good. So that was all that it was. It was that little red dot, that we're using. Now, one of the things that I do want to do is that if we move away from the screen, I actually want the red dot to be hidden. So that's something that I want to change, but I need to change something in the XR Tools library for that. You know, that'll be something that we'll do another day. But yeah, so that was that problem fixed. And that means that we can now start building those UIs. Now, one of the problems that I do have that I also need to look at is, I need to go into my 3D. So I removed the turbo lift on the side, which I had as a temporary stand-in. And my idea originally was to have a simpler version of the briefing room over here, which you would see when that door opens, and only going to the full briefing room environment when you actually select the door and you go into that room, because that's the way that I want to solve that. But I figured, because of the size of the room and the fact that when you're in the briefing room, I also want to be able to see inside the bridge when the door opens, so that you see where you're going if you go back. The idea is that when you're in the briefing room, it doesn't automatically start the briefing. We then have to do something in that briefing room to start the next mission, and that is when, you know, everything gets locked and we get through, you know, some sort of cinematic or something where the next mission gets explained. And that's where that screen is for. But of course, because I've now got them both there at the same time, that could potentially mean that in the when I'm in the bridge and I'm looking through that door, that I could potentially interact with whatever the button is that starts the next mission. So I need to improve on that, and probably now that everything is being extended from our main room scene, I'm probably gonna add some logic there that it switches off or on certain things depending on whether you're actually in that room. But yeah, that is all for improvement in the future. For now, I just wanted to make sure we do have our viewports working. Obviously, you know, right now they're just hanging things, with this one completely being transparent and this one having a bit of a color. That's going to change, obviously. Either they're going to be proper screens, or, you know, this makes sense to be you know, some sort of roll down projector screen or something like that. Or maybe even for some of these, especially for the mission briefing, you know, we might have, you know, a holographic table in the middle, and we have people standing around it, and we have sort of like a mission replay on the holographic table. That would really look nice in VR, I think. So that's probably a really good idea to tackle. Davies, well, you're welcome. I sub to a few channels, so remind me which one is yours. But yeah, there's a couple of new Godot channels that came up that were very interesting, with people doing some really cool stuff. So yeah, you're more than welcome, and hopefully you'll post some videos, and I'll be sure to watch them. And FECU, God ettermiddag. That's almost Dutch. You got close. Goedemiddag. Het is goedenavond voor mij. Okay. So the rooms that we have right now is the bridge, big box. Obviously, eventually turn it into a really pretty bridge. I wanted the meeting room to be a circular room. I thought that was kind of a nice touch. Obviously, right now I've just put that together by putting walls in a circle. But once we model that properly, it will be a proper room. Might even be that once we properly model it, I will split out the room again. So one of the things that I also have done is I've disabled the code that made all the rooms that were not invisible. That probably then has to come back once I decide which way I want to go. So I don't want to touch that code yet. On this machine, this one's more than powerful enough to render all these rooms, even though we're not in each one of them. Plus, the way that these rooms are built, with all the walls being small segments, our frustum calling is going to call most of the objects out of the render queue anyway. So this should be relatively efficient in how it's being rendered. Now, obviously, if I'm inside of my hangar here and I'm looking to the left, then potentially my my room over here will be inside of the frustum and may end up getting rendered for nothing. But at this point in time, I'm not too worried about it. If it turns out that I have multiple rooms that need to be visible at the same time for, you know, the same sort of reasons here, then I'll probably change the system. But if it turns out to just be the briefing room, I'm probably going to go back to my original idea and pull the briefing room out. And having a simple version of the briefing room attached to the bridge, and a simple version of the bridge attached to the briefing room, just for the visual part of that. And again, that's all that it is, right? It's purely for making the player see something when the door opens instead of looking into a big black hole. And that's the same with the turbo lists. They are currently just empty boxes. Now, one of the things that I did think about originally, I was planning to have some side doors in the cafeteria, but I think I'm actually going to be using this turbo lift to access all of the others. And obviously, again, they don't have to be nicely underneath. You know, I'm laying them out sort of in the place where they would be in the real ship. Because at some point, you know, once we have a real carrier, I want to make the outer shell of the carrier actually added to this, so that, for instance, if we are in the bridge and we're looking outside, we actually see the top deck of the carrier. In the cafeteria, I've also put a window, but that's probably just going to be looking outside. I don't actually think there's going to be any part of the ship visible from there, because it's sort of like it's like 10 forward in Star Trek, right? Where you're just at the front of the ship and you're looking outside. It's for the visuals. The observation deck, on the other hand, is probably going to be all the way at the top, where we're likely going to have a bigger view around. Again, for now, as a placeholder, it'll be another box. But I think that will actually be some sort of dome shape in the end, where you really have this 360-degree view outside, and you know, the outside eventually will change depending on where we are in the missions. So it's representative of the area that the carrier currently is in, and that might be the only one where we also enable a whole bunch of the stuff that we see outside. You know, have some NPCs flying around just to make the observation deck interesting to be in, because that's really what it is, right? It's a meeting place for people where they can, you know, do some stargazing, basically, and you know, do a little bit of R&R. And you know, that's how we then will have some interactions with some of our NPCs. Hi, MDifra Pro. Okay. Norwegian, cool. I have fond memories of visiting Norway. Yeah, I've been there quite a few times. I used to go to the Gathering, big demo competition in the mid-90s. That was a lot of fun to go to, and I went to a few smaller ones. Trying to think about Kindergarten, I think, was held there. I think I went to that one time. Good fun, good friends over there as well. That was yeah, my late teens in the demo scene were a lot of fun, and traveling, you know, driving down to Norway, taking the ferry over at Frederikshavn to Oslo. Yeah, good memories. We did some fun trips in those days. Small little joke the other way around is that I also used to be active in one of the Norwegian demo IRC channels. Made a lot of friends there from these demo scene parties. And there I usually greeted everybody in Dutch, which was quite hilarious, because those things got really lost in translation, and some of them meant some things that you probably don't really want to say out loud in Norway. Anyway, that's languages for you. All right, so just to complete it, I want to create our little temporary placeholder boxes for the other 3 rooms, so that we have something to teleport in. I'm not going to make anything fancy for them, you know, just to quickly get some things in place. Again, the biggest thing here, you know, when you block out scenes like that, it's just to get a sense of scale and a sense of what is necessary before you start actually creating the proper assets for your game. You know, if you hadn't done anything of this, and you just open up Blender and you start, you know, modeling there, you can end up modeling you know, a complete bridge and then drop it into your game and sort of go like, this doesn't fit, this doesn't work, it misses things. Retrofitting you know, a couple of turbo lifts, you know, for instance, like this. I'm wondering if we actually need this one. If we're going to make this turbo lift, you know, when you click on it, pop up a selection screen of sorts that selects which level you want to go in the carrier, because, you know, carrier can be pretty big and have multiple levels, and every level reaches a certain area of the ship. You know, that's something that you can easily change in something like this. You know, I've actually made this bridge twice as big as it was since last week, and that's just, you know, you just do that in a second to just get a feel of of what it is. And we probably are going to put some props in here first, you know, to figure out what are the elements that we actually want to have inside of the bridge. And those props might be boxes, right? Or might be very low poly versions of the things that we actually want to have in our bridge. We're just putting them in here to get a sense of what do we need, what do we want to have, when it's still very easy to change them. That's the whole idea of blocking out a level, using the simplest possible shapes, just to get a sense of everything that we need. And once we start getting most of the game mechanics in place, and we know that we've got everything for one of these parts of our carrier, and we've also at that point in time decided on a style for what it needs to look like, that's when you start actually, you know, building the assets that really need to be in here. Now with the outside stuff that we've built so far, obviously, you know, I went a little bit further by just downloading some or buying some assets off of people from CG Trader. With ships, that's pretty easy. Again, we've got a carrier that doesn't actually fit our needs, but it's a good stand-in. But our fighters, you know, they're nice models to work against, even though they probably, you know, they won't be the final models that we'll end up using in our game. With a bridge, that's much harder. You can't just go onto CG Trader and say, hey, there's a bridge that I want to use, and oh, there's a meeting room that I want to use. You won't find those things, right? And if you do find them, they're not going to be representative of what it is that we need to build. So that is the whole idea behind this stage of what we're doing right now. And I'm hammering on a bit about that, but it is one of those things that I do get questions about, where people sort of go like, you know, why don't you start modeling the proper assets? Or, you know, this looks so simple, why are you doing this? And I think it's an important thing to understand in the process of building something like this. Is you start simple. You start with basic forms just to flesh things out, and then you start building the things that look cool. The other thing is we've also got our hangar. So I'm actually going to open up our hangar for a sec. So this is, again, everything stand-in. You know, we just have our you know, just boxes for our launch tube. And this is something that, you know, we might eventually, you know, when we start our mission, we actually go inside of our ship, and we'll actually get launched out of this launch tube. Obviously, by that time, we really want to have a cool looking launch tube, because that's going to be, you know, that's going to give you your first thrill ride out of there. And that might actually be the part where, you know, your game starts. You know, you might just, the very first thing that happens once you go off from the initial loading screen is we go straight into battle. That might be a good idea. We'll see. But for now, it's just, you know, it's just boxes. It's just a thing, because I wanted to communicate that is what we eventually want to end up with. The idea is that we have, you know, two ships to configure, you know, your ship and your wingman. So possibly our wingman selection might be here, or that's something that we do while we're still in the briefing room. But that's also why I've put some doors in the side. These are doors that don't open when you look at them, because once we're here, we're expecting to actually start the mission. We don't actually have a back off. You know, we've gone through our briefing. We're going to start. If you quit out the game here and you load your save game, you're going to be you know, right before you start your briefing. It's a good auto save point. So those doors are purely there to indicate that this is just one of the launch tube rooms. And there might be multiple there, and that might be something that we eventually do. When you look at the outside of the ship, we might see the exit ports of multiple of these launch tube, and possibly at two sides of the ship. The other thing, of course, is, you know, this is right now just a box, but I've made it twice as high as the others, just to communicate that we do want a big hangar space. But this is not realistic in the sense of there's no way that our fighters can get in here after a mission. There's no way that they can move. So once the real game, you know, once we build the real level, we're probably going to extend this out more, and possibly have some things where you can see that these, you know, there might be like a lift in the ground here where the ships get, you know, moved up from a bigger maintenance area underneath or above or something like that. Same with landing. You know, we're going to have the landing purely on the outside once we're in a mission. We're not going to actually have that on the inside of our ship, but give that whole feel of that the launch system and the landing system are separated. Those are different parts of our carrier. The ships come in on a potentially on a safer area where they can come in hot if they if they're damaged or whatever, and get turned around there, and then eventually they go back into the launch room where we'll eventually have a catapult system here or something like that. Do fully admit I'm a big Battlestar Galactica 1980s fan. And this is one of those things that I always loved about that series, and it's been copied in many games and many other environments. But there's definitely some inspiration there when it comes to the setup of having a proper launch bay. Now, the other thing which is really important. Hi, Rodzilla. I'm fine. How are you? Thank you for joining again. The other thing which is really important, I think, for having a launch bay like this instead of having a more open area like we have with our original carrier, is that it makes it easier in a sense like this, that you once you're flying around the carrier ship inside of the game doesn't have to have anything special. It's just the external shell of the ship. While with our current carrier, we can fly inside of it, and we have a whole area inside that gives problems with our shadow buffers not being large enough to actually properly cast shadow in the inside. It gives all sorts of lighting problems because you're expecting to have lots of lighting inside of there. And you solve that by here. All the lighting is here, which is never going to be in our normal game. This is much smaller scale, so we can have our shadow maps working properly. And the moment that you're shot out of the launch tube, when you go actually into the game, we're not going to see much of what's behind it. We're going to have probably a much simpler version of this. And then we're going to get shot out of the launch tube. And the moment you're out of the launch tube, we just hide that room. And then when you look at it from the outside of the ship, it's you're going to see the exit ports of the launch tubes, but we'll just it's going to be dark inside. The whole launch tube is dark, so you're not actually going to be able to fly into that or see into that. It's just purely a visual element of the ship. So this is again one of those optimizations where you can actually, especially on something at the scale of a space game, where you can take out a lot of complexity and just by game design. Just by having something simple as a launch tube for the ships. Okay, enough talking about all of that. Let's quickly put together these last 3 rooms as placeholders. Again, I'm not quite sure. My original idea was to have the brig work on this second set of turbo lifts. So these are the turbo lifts for the normal people, and these are the turbo lifts that give access to the more secure parts of the ship. We might still leave that in place and leave that door disabled until you're being promoted to a point where we're an officer and we're actually allowed to interrogate a prisoner that we took or something like that, and give us a reason to access the brig, and potentially other places in the ship as well. Right? We might unlock other parts of the ship to you might romance the captain or something. Who knows? That was a big theme in what's that game called? What's it? Mass Effects. Where you could romance all the crew members. And again, that's kind of the similar idea. Whether you look at Wing Commander or whether you look at Mass Effects or many of those other games, they story progress all in a similar way by giving you a certain amount of freedom to move around the ship and interact with all the crew members. So we might eventually, actually a good point, we probably should have a research deck here that we can talk to someone doing research on weapons we found or aliens we encountered, or something that drives the plot forward. So those are all sorts of things that we eventually want to think about adding in. So I'm inheriting or expanding from all of these. Which one were we doing right now? We were doing the player quarters. I probably wrote that wrong. Well, if I did, I also wrote it wrong over there, so we're going to keep it the same. All right, so that means that we can delete that one. And we're going to go and put our player quarters in place. Move you up. There we go. And interesting that that position is over there. I wonder why it actually moved it over there. Because it doesn't look like right. Oh, I moved that one up. That's right. Well, this, the positioning doesn't matter, right? It's all these rooms are separated from each other. They're only being placed in the main scene to sort of tell them apart and navigate between them. But as far as the player is concerned, they're going to be only in one of these rooms at a time, and eventually we'll have all the other rooms hidden again. Like I said, I've disabled that for now, but we are going to re-enable that. Orientation-wise, I do want to have certain things laid out sensibly. Now, when we look at the player quarters, it makes a lot of sense that a turbo lift doesn't go directly into your quarter. From a gameplay perspective, we'll have we'll have an option in our turbo lift, go to crew quarters, and it does teleport you into your quarters. But then when we look outside of that, we're not going to directly see the turbo lift. We're going to see the hallway with other crew quarters, or get a glimpse of that, because we won't be able to see much outside of there. But of course, it will bring you back into the turbo lift, unless we want that actually as a separate location. That's very possible. Definitely something to think about, whether we want to have that hallway just to make it clear that there are, other people around. And who knows, maybe at some point have a reason to even go into some of those rooms. For now, I'm not going to do that. For now, I'm going to assume that we, from the turbo lift, go directly into the player quarters, and the player quarters allows us to go directly back into the turbo lift. All right. I'm gonna have to figure out a way to nicely reuse that, because else we have the same thing in our scenes multiple times. Or maybe that's exactly what we need to do. I don't know. We will see. That's actually, I actually want to add that into our. I want to add that into our setup here. Enter room, exit room. So these are just going to be placeholder methods, so that we know that we can call those. And that means that in our, is it in main? No, that's not. That's in here. So when we change our room and we have a room, well, we're actually already doing our set player path empty, so we could already be figuring it out on that. But I think it's nicer to call them separately, to really make clear that that's the thing that we do. So here we do it in the other way around. Current room dot enter room, so that we have something that we can put some logic against. And that means that when there's things that take a lot of processing power to render while we're not in that room, so no, most things will automatically stop doing stuff because you're hiding that room. But there's other things, like for instance viewports, which will keep rendering even if we are not in that room. And while I don't have support yet in our viewport 2D in 3D to turn that off, that's still a pass through that I want to create. That is obviously something where we want to disable things. We're probably going to end up with quite a few viewports in our whole carrier, because that's going to be all the stuff that we're going to interact with. So yeah, we're going to want to be able to turn those things on and off, so that we react properly with it. The other thing which is important is turning off all our physics stuff, right? Like our doors. Because in theory, when we're over here and I'm standing, so in here, I could be looking, well, not very likely because we put it higher. It's more likely if I'm over here. If I'm in the hangar, I could potentially look at the door of, the cafeteria and interact with the door, because it's still in the same scene. There are no physics objects. And and closing the space that we're in, because we're not doing any sort of locomotion in this game. That's the other option. Put some more physics objects in place to just stop our ray from hitting stuff. But I think it's smarter to, when we're hiding a room, is also disable the door and stuff. So so that's something that we're going to be wanting to do with the enter room and exit room. Well, Sagres, that's the remark that I'm getting a lot, and that's why I made a big deal of this in the start of my introduction. We're not at that stage, right? The whole reason we are keeping things simple, the whole reason we are using blocks and simple walls and stuff to flesh this out, is we are designing this level. We are trying to get to a place where we know the elements that we want in our game, in this part of our game. I'm not going to start building high quality assets if I don't even know what I need, right? You can't put a horse in front of a cart. Or what is that saying? I'm not quite sure. This is called blocking out a level. And even when you look at people who there's this really cool YouTube channel called Quixel, which is I think a company or a product or something like that. They do really high detail assets for Unreal Engine and probably also Unity, but I think they mainly focus on Unreal. They have a lot of level design videos where they're showing with the assets that they have how they can quickly put a scene together. They do exactly the same thing that I'm doing here. They start with putting boxes in place. They start with a cube and they stretch it and they place it and they start mapping it out and where they want to have things, and then they start putting the high quality assets in, because it's easier to modify and change cubes than to redo a completely designed asset. So it's a time saver. You first block out your level. And for me, even, I'm not even a modeler, right? I'm not even a 3D artist. So for me, it's going to even be at a point where when I am ready, that I know that I've got all the elements in these rooms that I need, I'm then going to talk to one of my modeler friends and say, hey, look at this. This is the design that I need for this room. Can you now model a high quality room for me? And then this will hopefully have a high quality. Don't put the horse before the cart. It's an interesting saying that I actually don't even know where that saying is coming from. So, just for people who are new, who haven't actually seen any of this stuff, but just fun to remind people who are new what we're actually working for. Now, this is still all pretty simple too, because we've even got just our asteroid field with simple stuff. But once you start putting some nicer, and these are just downloaded assets. Again, just placeholder. Things start to get a lot nicer. And here, I haven't even spent any time on lighting or anything like that. There was someone who posted some screenshots of a game that they were working on that was also in space, where they really worked on getting some of the lighting to look really cool. That's all stuff that I plan to get to at some point in time and do. Anyway, yeah, the horse before the cart. That's the, yeah. This is the cart before the horse. I don't know. I always mix that one up as well. Anyway, let's continue, because I have been talking, and now it's time to do some more blocking out. So again, we are purely going to put our placeholder stuff in there. Oops. By the way, I always search for the thing that I want to call it. It's so annoying. So we put our floor tile in with our ugly green texture. So this is the other thing which, what did I do? Oh, I did new material. That wasn't what I had in mind. So this is one of these other things which is important. I need to create a few more before I know that. So I'm actually gonna call that floor 01. Boom, boom, Select all of these. Boom. So each of these floor tiles is 1 by 1 meter, if I remember correctly. What did I make them? Because I made them a little while ago. No, 2 by 2 meters. So they're actually already bigger. So this is already a 6 by 6 meter room. Is it? This is larger than that even. No, it's a 6 by 6 meter room. Yeah. 1, 2, 3. These textures actually are specific designed for that. So this is a 4 by 4 tiling texture. And it's actually even easier to see in the bridge because we put some lights in here. So we can see that these squares are exactly 4 by 4 meters. So that gives us a sense of how big this room is, which is going to be really important because it's easy to just think that something is a certain size and make a room that looks nice, and then suddenly it turns out you got a bedroom that's 15 by 15 meters. Don't think people's bedrooms are generally that big, and definitely not on a carrier where people usually have pretty small quarters. Now that's why I'm going to keep this one small, but I might have actually made it too small until we start placing some stuff in there, putting a bed in there and stuff like that. We might need to make this slightly bigger, but I'm eyeballing it right now. So let's put a wall in there. So here we're just going to keep the walls really simple. We need a door at one side, and that's about it. I'm going to save that because I want to see how that's oriented. So that's over there. So I actually want you to be over there. So I'm gonna go put the door on the side. Okay. And again, you know, this is just my one door that I made, and this does not make sense as a door for someone's quarters. Let's put a spatial in place first. But it's just to make sure that I know that there has to be a door here. And then, whoops, how did I manage to select that? There we go. Here we go. So obviously that's a way too big door for our room here, but it's just so that we have a door. Load. There we go. I really need to change the mappings on my keyboard. There we go. Here we go. Boom, 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 boom. Yeah, that looks way, way, way too small. So I might just quickly make it a little bit bigger than this, but not much bigger. Let's see. 1, 2. Boom, 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 boom. All right, there we go. Gonna make a floor. Oops, that was on the wrong axis. There we go. And can't see the wood for the trees with all the lines in here. So I think I mentioned this last time, but one of the things that I really need to change is I've got my shift key set up for panning. So when I'm trying to select something, I tend to end up panning instead of selecting, which is really annoying. All right, so we're gonna go quickly throw our light in here. And again, it's just a light that we need for now. What's it called? Omni lights. And that's gonna go almost on the roof. There we go. That's good enough for now. And go and put our roof tiles in place. And again, I'm just going to use my white tiles. So my white tiles are, I think, the only tiles that I haven't put any measurements on. So our blue tiles over here, they've got a 1 meter by 1 meter measurements. Now I think we need to watch them from the other side to see that properly. So again, we can see that this door is 4 meters by 4 meters. Don't think anybody has a door that big in their room, but it's, you know, it's just my placeholder for doors. Eventually I'll need to make proper doors, and doors of different sizes. Oops. Oh, well. And then we can start making this look like a real quarters of a person. For now, it's just so that we can start building our logic together and start deciding on what do we actually want to have in these areas. You know, and what is their purpose going to be? What are we going to be able to do in the player's own quarters? Is this where we're going to handle the save games, or is this going to be, you know, something else that we have access to? I don't know yet. Hi, Ankit. Thank you for joining. All right. Now, last thing, I'm just going to put that turbo lift back in. And again, this is the one that probably won't stay, or shouldn't stay, I should say. There we go. Because the idea obviously is that when you look outside of your room, you shouldn't go straight into a turbo lift. You should be going into a hallway where you potentially you know, have the turbo lift at the end of the hallway. But yeah, we'll just keep that one in there just for now. Just to have our mechanism working and make sure that we know that we can go to the different areas. All right. So we've got our player quarters in there. So let's put an observation deck in. Again, I really don't know what we're going to be doing with that one yet. I've got some ideas. But I think as a result, oops, how the hell did I manage to do that? Here we go. Floor. We're just gonna put a floor in here and nothing else. And I know that's gonna look really weird, which also means that we're not gonna have a door. Maybe we're just gonna have that just on one side. That might work. But the idea, obviously, like I said, is this should eventually be something where we have like a 360 degree. And that's actually maybe a nice idea, that we actually put the turbo lift in the middle and then build like a round dome around it. Let's actually do that. So I'm going to move that out of the way. So that's going to be MISC. There we go. Which means that we can put our turbo lift in. Boom. There we go. We got a turbo lift. That does mean that our head position should be outside somewhere. We don't want to start in our turbo lift, so we're going to make sure that's somewhere over here. It also means we need some doors. There we go. Again, all our placeholder stuff just in there for now. And now we have a problem that I really need a new wall piece, because our walls are too big. All right, so what I'm just going to do is I'm going to grab our wall. So that was 4 meter high. Let's go and duplicate that, and we're gonna make that, call that half tile. because I want that to be completely the same. This needs to be saved, by the way, before I lose my changes. On hinge joints, yeah, I am actually, if you look on my YouTube channel, a stream that I did on a Sunday about 2 weeks ago, you will see that I've been experimenting with the joints for my object interaction tutorial series. And we got to a point where we got, you know, a lot of basics around that working. There's a lot of experimentation in there. You can see, you know, problems that we encountered and how we worked around those. I have yet to actually turn that into a tutorial, because that's my plan, to turn that into my next object or interaction tutorial, because I'm using hinge joints to open doors and that sort of stuff. I've just been too preoccupied with a couple of things and haven't been able to spend any time on that. But if you're interested in that sort of stuff, go and watch that, because I already handle quite a few things around this in that tutorial. All right, so we now have a half, and I've made that off center to on purpose. Is that a smart idea? I think I'll keep it that way. Again, you know, these things are eventually all going to be thrown away anyway. It's just to get a basic idea of where we are with this stuff. Boom, boom. So that one is nicely in place. There we go. But that one will be at the wrong spot, so we're just going to go and turn that one around. And I think if I move that, that fits nicely as well. So that just makes it easier to have some components that we're using. There we go. We're going to go and bring our floor into here again. So I'm just going to go all around this thing. A ninja. Sorry, I'm horrible with names. I am very sorry. I'm butchering everybody's names like that. Did I accidentally duplicate that twice? No, I did not. So yeah, it is a little bit repetitive what we're doing right now, but we're nearly through having at least all the placeholders for our rooms, and we can start working on the logic that we can actually move from one room to the other. Come on. That's what I meant by always moving things a bit wrong. There we go. So that's it doesn't have to be rocket science, but that's what I mean by having problems with the fact that my shift is also pan. Come on. Hope I didn't end up selecting something I shouldn't be selecting there. All right. I'm going to be deleting some of these because I want to go and make them round. There we go. I'll actually go a little bit more to here. I don't think I'm symmetrical anymore. I think I made a mistake somewhere. I think it's because I've got one side that's longer than the other side. Okay. Well, let's get rid of them. Again, it's just about communicating what we want to do with these rooms, and not about actually creating the rooms that will stay in the game. That is good enough. So I just wanted to create a circle, and you know, it probably needs to be even larger than what I've created right now. But the idea being that you're at the top of an observation deck with 360-degree around area, where we can just look around, and you know, this will have to get a glass dome on it, have to get a proper floor, railings, all that sort of thing. That's all up to when we actually start modeling this stuff and doing something nice with it. But for now, we just have a place that we can stand and we can look around and we can see the sky and all that sort of stuff. And you know, there'll probably be some benches and stuff like that where people can sit on, so that we can interact with whoever is sitting down there or something like that. So for now, that is just the placeholder that we want to communicate that that is the thing that we plan to do over here. So there we go. Let's again roughly place that wherever it is that we want that to be. All good. Yep. We do need a light. And again, it's just one light, just to because it's actually going to be much darker in the real game once we load it, because we've got a different environment that loads in. There we go. Omni lights. Here we are. Boom. And we'll just put that up a bit and make that a bit. Whoops. Make that a bit stronger, so that we just have a light that allows us to actually see around where we are. Not that there's anything gonna, you know, there's nothing there to see at the moment, but it's just a placeholder. It's just something to know that is one of the rooms that we want to do. So the last one is the brig. And then we have all the points of interest that we want to start with. Let's go with brig. More of the same. Actually, what I'm going to do for this one, I'm just going to put my floor tile in here. I'm not actually going to build this one, because I don't think that was one that we're going to be reaching to start with anyway. So I just want to have it in there so that we have our scene in place. So I'm going to go move that one over here, because that one, right now the idea is to go through that turbo lift to there. So I'm purely going to leave that in place as a placeholder, so that we have somewhere that we can go to. If we're going to go to our bridge, we have our so this one we're going to turn off. So make sure that we can't open that door. And I think this one we're going to rename, and we're going to say this is going to be to others. Boom. All right. Yes, we could definitely do a grid map. But again, when you look at this, just moving things around and placing them more exact, and because not everything is actually placed on the grid, makes it easier to just position stuff and just get a scale of what it is that we need. Like I said, nothing of this is going to end up in the final game. It's all just placeholder stuff to flesh out the basic environment that we need. So that is all that we're doing here. Well, I would use a grid map if that's actually the thing that I wanted to have in the game, with proper assets and predefined tiles. You know, grid maps are really, really strong when you want to create multiple levels. This is just a basic interior of the carrier where we have some of the interactions with the NPC, they're going to be fairly fixed set pieces. And all of these are going to be very different from each other. You know, when right now I'm just reusing these very simple objects just to create our environment. But the final version, you know, each of these rooms will be completely custom made in modeling software. They might be some objects that will be separate, like the things that we've actually put inside of the rooms. We might use some things that get reused to get a consistent style over the rooms, but for the most part, they're all going to be created inside of modeler software. So that's why I wouldn't be using a grid map in this particular case. But if I would be building, let's say, a platformer or another level-based game where you're reusing the same assets over and over again, grid map is really strong to lay stuff out very quickly and do things with. As far as a loading screen for a simple 3D game and not VR, that depends a little bit on what you mean by simple. When you look at, for instance, the background loading tutorial that I did for going from one scene to another, which is also something that I use. I actually use that in here. Just haven't really been applying it yet because there's not, you know, we only have 2 scenes right now. But that principle isn't different between VR and non-VR. You know, all the logic that I wrote there is equally usable in a normal game as it is in VR. The only difference is that the screen that you show while background loading your next level is more as a fixed camera, basically. But the principle behind it is still the same. I would use that same technique just as, you know, in a normal 3D game, just the same as in a VR game. So the technique is still the same, unless you want to have, you know, something different. I don't know, fade outs and stuff might be a little bit easier because you don't have to worry about the person being able to manipulate the camera, which is something that we need to worry about in VR. That's probably the only thing that I could think of that you could simplify in that solution. I specifically work, well, in this stream, I'm purely looking at obviously building this game. So this will probably stay at a somewhat higher level. Well, not right now because we're making very simple, blocking out scenes, but my tutorials are mostly focused on VR because that's what I do. Now, I don't mind doing some more simpler tutorials if people have good suggestions of what they should be about. I did the whole physics tutorials introduction, which was a lot of fun to do. So if there are, if people have suggestions for things that are of that nature, but I won't do anything bigger than that simply because that is something that I just don't have the time for. I wish I did because I love doing these things. But I have to choose my projects carefully. If you are a beginner in Godot, I can highly recommend Kids Can Code, GD Quest, and Heartbeast. Those are 3 incredible channels with a lot of beginners content and advanced content as well. So definitely check those guys out. Alrighty. Where were we? So we've got basically all the standard things that we want to have here. So we need to start working on actually moving between areas. Now, going from our main room into our briefing room is going to be pretty easy because we can basically react on clicking that door and doing something. But that door has multiple locations that we can go to. So the question is, do we make the doors work differently? or do we just make the doors detect that you click on them and then leave it up to implementation in the scene itself to decide what you want to do, which means that we will be repeating things in every in multiple parts, or do we do something more generic? So one of the things that I'm thinking about was enhancing our door, that when it's that we can actually specify which items it can go to. So that instead of it just reporting to us, I've been clicked upon, is that when it clicks upon, it opens up some sort of screen, menu, something that allows you to make that selection. And then tells us what the selection was that was made. I think that's probably the nicest way to do this. And I think actually the moment that the door opens, we're gonna show that menu. Except for the briefing. Again, if there's only one option, it should be smart enough to just say there's only one option, I don't need to do this. I think it would be nice to actually do that logic on the door. That also means that we always need to make sure the door faces the right way. Or that we know which way we're looking at. Oh, that's something that we can solve, I'm pretty sure. So yeah, let's start with putting that logic onto our door. So start with our bridge, because that is where we have all these guys. And that also makes sense because every level there are different, a different set of things that we can go to. Where is my door? Here we go, door. I'm going to close everything else because it's getting a bit full. Yeah, Mario is fun, a little platform. I'm actually I'm following some of the steps that are in one of the Godot books that were written to teach my son some Godot. He's starting to do something. He really loves Kids Can Code. He's currently by himself. He's building the little tank game that that Kids Can Code did, which is a pretty decent beginner tutorial. So yeah, those sort of things are good. When you look at Mario, who was it? Was it Heartbeast? No, Game Endeavor. Look up Game Endeavor's channel. He's got a whole beginner's course on making a platformer game that he's got this cute little bear that he uses to do everything with, and it's got everything from animating the bear, making him look like he walks, and doing all the logic of making him jump from platforms, and it's a little Mario game with a bear. It's pretty cool. So I can highly recommend checking him out. He's and GD Quest has got some really good platformer ones as well. So definitely worth checking out. You mean the queue-free child for showing where we're going? Yeah, that's probably something that we do. But let's first define the array of it, and yeah, cool that you're making a zombie game with your son. It's a lot of fun when your kids start to get interested in it. I've had the experience with my son that he wants to make games because he sees his dad hobby with games. And then he sees how much work it is, and he's sort of, I'll just play games. But he's finally getting to a point where I think for him the biggest thing that changed was he started learning coding at school. They did visual coding with what's that program called? This Microsoft Code thing. Splash or Squash or something like that. I can't remember what it is. But where you just draw little or hook little building blocks up, and make very simple logic for your game that way. And it's a lot of fun, and I think that's finally sort of gotten him to a point where he's sort of going like, okay, I really want to do more with this. But he's also found out that those things have very quick limits, and that's why he's now trying out trying to figure out what Godot is all about. So he can use that. Now, there's so much open here. Where's my brain? I don't have my brain open anymore. Okay, that means I do need to go back to my file system for a second. Where is my AI? I should actually put that in a separate folder. There we go. And I just wanted to go there because here I've got that definition. There we go. And that's not going to be default state, but that's going to be called destinations. There we go. Destinations. There we go. So we're going to make an array of strings that will tell us where it is that we're going. Is that smart to make that a single dimension string? Yeah, I think that probably is a good idea. The thing that I'm thinking about is that our where are we? Our names here are probably going to be different from what we want to show to the user. Which means that I think that we're going to break some naming conventions here, and I'm actually going to make these names exactly what we're going to be presenting in our menu that comes up. Scratch, that was the one. Thank you, Rod. Whoa, chat's going crazy. Yeah, GD Quest is definitely Nathan's really doing a lot of good, and he's starting to work together with a lot of the other content creators now as well. So it's not just him anymore. For the last year or so, he's got about 3 or 4 other guys doing video content for him as well, including some of the other guys who make some really good tutorial content. So it's really cool to see what he's doing. He's really upping the game and making sure that there's some really good teaching material available for Godot, which is can't recommend him enough, and he's a great guy too. So the 400 mine is great too. All right. By the way, speaking of just so that you know, that's not in packages, repositories. Where are you? Godot demo projects. Keep in mind, I don't know if everybody knows this, but on the Godot engine GitHub page, there is a repository called Godot demo projects that has a lot of small beginner examples on how to do things. And the Trucktown one, I believe, has a really nice example of how you can do scene switching, where you start off in a selection screen, and then depending on your selection, you then go to the actual environment that you do something in. So, and then you get a little truck that you can drive around in. And there's lots of other little examples on this site as well. So this is a project worth downloading and just having a look at all the different examples that are in there. There are a lot of beginner examples in there, and just how-to examples of how you do certain basic things in Godot. Well, and Ninja, it is true that Godot could use much more tutorials, but there is a lot more out there than you think. So, definitely on YouTube, go and look up, names like GD Quest, Kids Can Code, Heartbeast, Game Endeavor. There's actually a page for that too, I believe. Godot docs. There's a resources page on here. Tutorials and resources. There you go. So here you go. Look at that. There's a whole list of people doing tutorials, and a lot of these are really good. And Big Dev is really interesting as well. So Kids and Code, Heartbeast, GD Quest. Game from Scratch does nice things. He's definitely worth checking out. Although he does more news reporting and overview videos, and just keeping everybody up to date with what's new. So yeah, Kids Can Code's Godot Recipes is a really good site to look at. So yeah, Andrea and me in our devlogs. So yeah, good resource. And the docs are a really good place to look around as well. There's obviously, look at that. There's a whole bunch of things in here as well for all sorts of, well, most of these are just explanatory for simple things, or singular things, I should say. They're not necessarily simple, but there should be some bigger ones as well. But it's a bit of searching because they're all kind of hidden in each section. But definitely worth having a look through and seeing what you can find. So there's a lot more than you think. It's just not always visible. I think that's the biggest problem that Godot has, is there are quite a lot of people doing stuff with it and quite a lot of people creating content, but they're not always easy to find. It's not always easy to know that they're around. So yeah. Well, Unity is a lot bigger than Godot. Unity's been around a little bit longer, but we're catching up. And the other thing is, well, I guess when you're still beginning and you're learning Godot, you really have to stick to the tutorials that are really for Godot. But once you've gone past that basic level, and you figured out how to approach problems in Godot, then a lot of the content for the other game engines still applies. Game development is game development. In the details it's very different because all these game engines approach problems in slightly different ways. But there's a lot of synergy there as well. The way that you design levels doesn't really change between one game and another. The type of logic that you need, the theory behind the logic that you need to make your game run, it doesn't change from one game engine to the other. It's the implementation that changes, but a lot of it is overlapping. Especially when you look at, for instance, a subject like shaders. It's amazing how much a shader tutorial for Unity can teach you about how to do certain techniques in Godot, and because the principles are all the same. So yeah, don't give up too quickly, I would say. Anyway, we were working on the door. So I've got my destinations here. This is going to be tricky because this is going to be going back and forward a bit. So we got our destination here. So how many destinations do we have from this list? So we're in here. We can go there. That's 1, 2, 3. So we want 3 places that we can go to from that door. So we're going to go and change that to 3. That gives us our 3 positions. And then we're going to go and use the names over here. So we're going to have the cafeteria. Boom. We're going to have our player quarters. Oops. That wasn't quite what I had in mind. There we go. So we're going to copy that in. And we're going to be able to reach our observation deck. Now, the big question I have right now, can I move these easily up and down? Probably not, because I want to put the cafeteria and the observation deck the other way around. So let's go move that there. Because if we're going to show them in the same order as we got them over here, then yeah, that's something that we want to do. So now the question is, how are we going to display this? Are we going to just do a viewport again and then render this off to a 2D interface, and then we can click on those? I think that's probably a good enough idea. Now the other problem that I'm wondering about is we have a pointer entered and pointer exited here. But if we are using a viewport to do our selection, then that's going to take over. This is where we really do need to know whether I need to add that pointer entered and pointer exited to our viewport as well, so we can actually detect whether our player is looking at those and say, well, if I'm either looking at the door or I'm looking at our menu, then or do we just pop it up when we open the door? I think that might be a smarter idea. That's a good question. All right, let's have a look. Yep. Yeah. Yeah, that is one thing that is nice about Godot. The requirements of your PC is a lot less than Unity and Unreal. They need a little bit more powerful machine to do things with. So there's a win. Where do I learn things from? Trial and error. You know, first of all, I've been doing this for a while. Although, you know, truth be told, you know, I have, as we were talking about way at the beginning of the stream, when FECU mentioned about his Norwegian roots, and I was talking about that in my demo scene days, I often traveled to Norway to go to demo events there. And that for me was a really big learning school, being part of the demo scene, making demos in the mid-late 90s. And that was before you had accelerated graphic cards, right? So we did everything on the CPU. So you had no choice but to learn how this stuff worked at a low level, and basically write shaders, not in, you know, GLSL or whatever the language is called again, HL something on DirectX. You know, before that you did everything on CPUs, which meant that, you know, if you could render 100 polygons on screen, you were a hero. Especially if you textured those things with lighting and everything. But that was a lot of fun to figure out and do those things. So that's where I learned how render engines work. And that was a lot harder than it is today. You know, today you open up YouTube, you find dozens and dozens of tutorials and stuff about these things, about how to make your own game engine and that sort of stuff. And it's just a matter of spending the time to learn it. In those days, you had to get lucky that you got part of a community like this, or you know, the hacker scene was quite big as a way for people to learn things. Although in those days, of course, also, you know, a lot of people got into game dev in the 80s and then in the 90s. Life was simpler back then, you know, because you couldn't do the things with computers you can do now. The games were also a lot simpler, so it took less effort to learn certain things. Other things were much easier now, or are much easier now. You know, the fact that you can download Unity and that you can make a 3D game without really understanding how the engine works. Back then you couldn't think of those. But anyway, point being that I learned how to build render engines. And kept doing that as a hobby for a long time, because I actually write business software for a living, and that allowed me, you know, when I discovered Godot and VR became a thing, and I wanted to dive into that was my contribution to Godot. I love figuring those things out. I wanted to get into VR. So I was able to add that logic to Godot, because that's something that I'm really good at, which now translates to doing tutorials about that, and eventually you know, starting on an even game project. But when I look at building a complete game like this, there are a lot of parts of this that I understand, that I know about, that I know how to do, and there's a lot of parts about this that I am sort of going like, I'm figuring it out. That's also why I'm doing this as a stream and not as a tutorial, because I need to figure these things out first before I can even start doing tutorials. So while a lot of the stuff that we're doing right now is just, you know, using the knowledge that I've gained over the years and applying it, you know, something that's completely new for me is, for instance, the AI that we were working on in the last couple of weeks. And while I understand some of the theory, putting it into practice, you know, I'm learning as I'm doing it here on stream, and hopefully taking you guys along, and you know, you can see me struggle and see the sort of things that I run into, and hopefully that'll teach you guys something as well. In order to get there, I do the same thing you guys do. I watch other people's tutorials. I read online about things. I try to, you know, discuss with other people that I know within the industry what their thoughts are on this, how they approach these problems, and try and figure out, you know, how can I match that up with what I already know about game development. So that is really where you go. I currently live in Australia. Yes, shadows. We can have a really quick discussion about shadows. I need to be mindful of the time though, because I do wanna finish around 12 this time, and not like last week end up still busy at 2 o'clock in the morning, because I unfortunately have somewhere to be tomorrow morning. All right, so we're not doing anything with shadows in here right now. We can see the ball is not casting shadows, and that is because I only have some Omni lights in here. So I'm actually going to turn those Omni lights off, and I'm going to put a directional light in here, because that is the thing that most people light their scene with. So let's go and give that a nice little angle. Where are we? Why can't I select my green ring? There we go. I just want that thing to not be pointing straight down, because that's going to be ugly. So let's move it a little bit more up. So I've got my snap still on, which is why it jumps in steps. There we go. That's a light that goes in a certain direction. Now, there's no shadows right now because we've got our shadows turned off. So let's go and turn some shadows on. We've got some light bleeding over there, which is a bugger all thing in VR to deal with, unfortunately. And of course, because we are on a very small scale here, we're actually doing quite well. I need a bigger scene for this. So you know what? I'm just going to go and just put a big plane. And I'm going to delete this later on, but I don't mind spending a few minutes talking about this, because it is something that a lot of people struggle with. I'll move that down a bit. I just want to make this nice and large. There we go. Boom. And I actually had problems with shadows as well. You can actually already see the quality going a bit down when we zoom out. I had a lot of problems when I'm not going to reopen it. When we look at the carrier and having the asteroids project shadows on the carrier, because of the large scale that I'm working on in space. Because I think the whole play space that we're currently working in is probably 8 by 8 kilometers, and that's really small for space. For a normal game, when you're walking around an area, it's fine, but for something like that, it's not very good. So we can see a number of problems already happening here, but I just wanted to create one more thing to have something cast some shadows. So I'm going to make that a cube. I'm going to move that up, move that out. Let's have a look. All right. I want that one to be a bit bigger. There we go. It's actually not so bad at the moment, interestingly enough. These shadows aren't too bad. The biggest issue right now is the light bleeding that we have right at the corners. And I'm a little surprised actually at having that problem. All right. Anyway, let's see. Let's have a look at a few of these settings, and have a bit of a look at what influences this. Now, the biggest problem that we have in VR is that we have this 1 unit is 1 meter scale, and scale in VR is incredibly important. You can't just suddenly switch scale because you'll actually feel like a giant or you feel like a mouse in your game if you get the scale wrong. Unless you also tell VR that you are working at a different scale. And when we look at our settings here, the first one that is really important is this one, bias. So the way that shadows work is that from the point of our sun, we're actually rendering our scene as if you're standing at the light point, looking in the direction that the light is shining. And we're rendering the scene, and all that we're rendering is the depth buffer. So we're basically trying to figure out how far away from that light source everything is. And when I'm then rendering my normal scene, so for instance, I am rendering this tile over here, what I'm basically doing is I am checking from the direction that the sun is going in. Or basically, I'm actually checking from the perspective of the sun, from the perspective of how I've made my shadow map, is where is that pixel that I'm rendering right now. And if that pixel is further away than whatever is in my depth buffer, that means that pixel is in shadow. And if it's closer to the thing, or there is nothing there in my shadow buffer, that means that my pixel has light. Now the problem that we have is that if we're somewhere over here and we look in the direction of the light, we're going to see that we're hitting this wall. So that depth buffer is set correctly. But you can see that here there is light bleed. And the reason for that is because our wall ends over there. And we're kind of like on that edge. That depth position is very close to the pixel on the ground that we're rendering. And because we're just doing a depth buffer check and there's a lot of imprecision in there, we have a margin of error that we set. And the margin of error that we set is the bias. Now the problem is, if you have a 1 unit is 1 meter system, then a bias of 0.1 means that our bias is 10 centimeters. So basically from the wall up until the floor that we're trying to figure out whether it's in shadow, there's a 10 centimeter area that we're going to disregard that the wall is actually causing our floor to be in shadow. So the thing that you would think is, well, I can't actually, that's really weird how I managed that. I actually want that to be 0, then I don't have any light bleed. Well, a small amount. Now, that seems to be a good idea. But what you'll now find is that when objects are really close to each other, you'll get a lot of fake shadow. So you do need a slight bit of bias. Now, on this scale, a bias of about 0.01 would probably be something that would work pretty well. Now, the other thing that we can do against, you know, light bleed like this is make sure that these objects are slightly moved down or slightly moved up. But I'm actually surprised that that light bleed is still that bad. That's really interesting. I would have expected that to be pretty good. Now, the other thing that we could do... Now, that's going the other way around. That's interesting. It's already doing reverse cull. So the other thing that we could do is actually make our walls slightly thicker. So that, again, that distance between where our object is... Because actually, it's calculating the shadow from the back face of the light. So actually, it's... No, it is seeing this face as the thing that's causing casting shadow. So yeah, I am very surprised that this is light bleeding so much. But yeah, we could go in our walls, and we could actually make our walls slightly bigger. Then again, this is already a 10 centimeter thick wall, so I'm surprised that it does that much light bleed. It's really interesting. So you can see if we make the walls slightly thicker, our problem is solved, because our bias is all of a sudden correctly changing our, or you know, making sure that our shadow logic knows that we're actually in shadow. I might actually keep it at that, because while I am not using directional lighting right now, it doesn't really make sense for what we're doing. I might eventually do that, because I might actually want to have light coming in through the window and doing something in our scene. So I might actually keep that that change in there. But that is one of the things that you need to keep into account. Now, that is only one problem, and that's a matter of really experimenting with it, or you know, working at a different scale. But know that, you know, it's a depth buffer where it's detecting how far away our fragment that we're rendering is from the nearest object that is, you know, from the perspective of the light. And if we're further away, we're in shadow. If we're closer, then we're in light. That's all that the shadow buffer does. Now the other thing is, and that was why I was trying to create this guy and sort of move out of the way a bit, but I can already see that the shadow is ending over there. So we also have some light bleed there. That's interesting. Only when we get too far away, though. I think that's really the only way that we can solve that, is making the wall slightly go into the floor. Maybe we should do that as well. So just make them ever so slightly higher, just so that they sink into the floor a bit, because we're not going to see anything from the top anyway. I was expecting that to do something. Did I not get saved? Oh, that's the width. That's not the height. That's not going to work. It still does. I am surprised by that. Anyway. Yeah, so for open world, that's actually where I'm about to get to. So, so yeah, so when we look at light bleed, it is all about making sure that the objects that cast shadow are thick enough so that that distance doesn't get too small, or that you work at a scale that the bias actually works in your advantage. Because I don't think we can make the bias even smaller. But again, you have to be careful that you don't. You know, the bias does have good effects and, you know, some problematic effects, and it's all about tweaking those and making sure that you're on the right track. But the other thing then is, and I'm surprised that didn't do as much as I hoped. It seems to be a little bit better. You know, you still see a little bit of light bleed here. But generally you can fix a lot by making sure that your walls go into the ground a little bit, and there's, you know, there basically has to be enough distance between the thing blocking the light and the thing that is in shadow. When those two get too close to each other, the depth buffer isn't precise enough to correctly decide whether something is in shadow or not. I'm just going to make it slightly bigger still. No, as you can see, it's still light bleeding. Well, that's something I don't want to waste too much time on, but that is the general thing that you need to look at with that. Now, the other thing, obviously I need to make sure that those get bigger as well. The other thing is about our the distance that our shadow map gets rendered. And when you're looking at being inside of a room and having like a spotlight or having, well, the OmniLights are actually quite expensive to do shadow mapping with, because you're actually doing a cube map if you want to have any sort of accuracy on your shadow map. So those are pretty expensive to do. So be careful with using OmniLights and shadows. Those take a lot of performance. But when you look at a spotlight, they're generally pretty good because you have a restricted cone that you light, and that means that you have a restricted area that you can cast shadow on. And creating the shadow map for that cone is something that that works really well. You have enough of a resolution in your shadow maps to make sure that that works properly. But when you have a directional light like this guy, and you have a large scene, like, you know, who was it who mentioned open world things? Yeah, and Chilla. So when you're looking at an open world, you have a large area to cast a shadow on. And you can already see that, for instance, for me right now, I've got my max distance here set to 100. So if I move more than 100 units away, you can see that my shadows stop working, because that is how far I am, you know, looking to create a shadow. Because remember, we are making a render, you know, of our light. So it's really just looking at, you know, as if I'm looking in the direction of my light. Which direction am I pointing at with my light? So, like that. So basically, somewhere I am rendering my scene from this camera. And I can't, you know, that doesn't go in infinite directions. The larger the area is that I want to cast a shadow on, the more terrain I cover with my texture, but my texture has a maximum size. You know, unless I go and create a 10,000 by 10,000 pixel shadow map, I run into limits, and therefore you have a limit to how far you want to go. Now, I can increase this, so I can say, well, you know what? I want my shadow map to go all the way to 1 kilometer. Now you can already see that it's having a lot of problems with the precision. So this is where my bias is now too low. I'm actually creating shadows by the object itself. So it's my floor is now casting a shadow on my floor because my bias can't figure out whether it is an object casting shadow that's closer or the object that is actually receiving light that is closer to itself. So here you can see that I actually need to go back to quite a lower bit bias to actually make that go away. I'm really surprised at how much I need to change that. I think that's where our normal bias is going to come in. I haven't really been playing with those settings yet, because there's the same problem, right? Is that these biases are going the wrong way around. Well, look at me putting it at a scale that it really doesn't like doing stuff with. Get it right. So it really doesn't like this this type of scale for figuring it out. But that is, you know, that is our problem with our bias. So we could do a reverse cull for this. So reverse cull is where we're actually using the back face of something, and especially for something like our floor, and our floor being not having any thickness to it. Because we're using the top layer of our floor, which is also the layer that's receiving the light, because we're using that to cast a shadow, we can also use the opposite side. Now, the problem that we have with using the opposite side is that there, in this case, it is now the back side here that is casting the shadow. All of a sudden, we have that bias problem exaggerated on our ground. So here, there's definitely a situation where, probably if we make that quite a bit larger. Now, this is really weird. Why? It doesn't look like it's protruding down. No, it is protruding down. So yeah, I really don't get why we're having a bias problem here. That doesn't make any sense. That's really weird. So that would probably only be solvable when making the walls thicker. So yeah, shadows are crappy to get good with light bleeding. However, the thing that I really wanted to show is with this max distance of 1000, you can really see how blocky our shadows become, because the resolution of our texture at that scale is just not enough, because it's trying to cast shadow on a way too large area. Now, one thing that is really cool about directional lights to compensate with that is that you're actually not working with one shadow map. We're actually working with 3 shadow maps at different distances. And that is where the splits come in. So basically, with a max distance of 1000, our first shadow map, our highest resolution shadow map, is at a 0.1 split, which basically means that covers now a 100 meter area. Then anything between that and this setting, which is 200 meters, is going to use our next step of our shadow map. And then from 500 meters, that is going to use our lowest resolution. Now, in this case, those numbers are not nonsense. They do not work at the scale that we are at. They work really well on this scale, where we have a high precision map within the first 10 meters. We have a slightly less precision map at 20 meters. And then everything above, or everything between 20 meters, between 50 meters and 100 meters is going to be using the last one. We must be using 4. Yeah, we're using 4 levels. So it's from 0 to 10 centimeters is using the high resolution, and from 10 centimeters to 20 centimeters we'll be using the next one, 20 to 500 the next one, and then the 4 split is 0.5 to 1000. Now in this case, because we are going to a much too high level, we're basically only using that first split to cast a shadow on our entire thing. So here we could actually go and fine tune that, and we could say, well, you know what? I still want to go and do my first levels much lighter. Now this is really weird. Why is that still so blocky? Or did I go too low? Hold on. So that should now be up to 10. In my my own engine that I was creating, I actually made sure that all these shadows were in different colors, so I could see where each level ended and whether I set this up correctly. I'm wondering about that. So yeah, I think that now I was just too close, I think. Because we can see for that first split, I've now put it on 20 meters, I think. So I'm on the max distance of 1000, and 0.02 would be 20 meters. So we got our high detail on up until 20, and we can get our next detail for, maybe that should be 5, and that should be 1. So with that, we can start playing around and saying, well, we want higher detail maps still pretty close to the camera, and we only want the last one to be, I might even want to go to something like this, and then do this one 2, and this one 1. So how far away are we now from these things? That's the big question, isn't it? 4, 8, 12, 16, 20. So that's about 24 meters. So yeah, when we're pretty close here, we're still on those first two. But that actually already means that that one, yeah, so this is already the one that's starting to break up too much because it's spanning too far a distance. I'm actually surprised by that. I was expecting that to be not as rough as it is. So now I've got, so that's from our first map, and that's already our second map, but at that resolution it's already going haywire. Now, so that's one of the things that we can play with. You know, again, I'm putting my max distance on some crazy numbers right now, but you play around with those splits to get your the first levels of your shadow maps to still be covering a relatively short distance, so that the shadows close to you look pretty sharp. I'm actually going to turn that one back off. To make those look pretty sharp, but then the shadows that are further away from you, because you want to, you know, if you do an open world level, you want that to be of higher quality. You want to cover a bigger distance, then you're going to have to accept that the shadows that are further away from your camera are going to be very blocky and very rough. But if you play around with those splits enough, you can make sure that the blocky ones are far enough from your camera, especially if, you know, because we're really looking pretty high, right? So here you can see actually that's the last split, which is, there's hardly any resolution back, because we're going to go from 40 to 1000, which there's just not enough resolution in there. But in reality, you know, you're obviously sitting over here. You know, you're not a couple. You know, we're 50 meters above the ground here, or something like that. You're actually very close to the ground. So when we start being very close to the ground, these sort of splits start to actually do some good. Now, there's still a lot of jaggy edges in here, and that's, I think, the bias that's still playing and messing around with us. So let's put the bias back to what it was. No, we still get a lot of that one. Is that just our... That is still too blocky. That is really weird. So I was actually expecting with these low settings, I can go a bit more like that. I was expecting those to be of higher quality. That's really weird. But the last thing that you need to play around to get this to, and it's a lot of experimenting to get them to really be right on that sort of scale. Again, that is why, you know, obviously I'm working more on this scale, and obviously I need to put these back to something more sensible, back to where they were. And we might actually even go even lower. You know, for the scene that I have here, I might even go to something like this, because I'm going to be inside, right? I'm not going to be looking much more than 20 meters ahead of me before I hit a wall. So that's fine by me. But when we're looking at the last thing that's really important is when we're looking at our quality. So here we have our shadow map size, which is right now a 4K texture, and that 4K texture is actually broken up into 4 parts, and each one is being used for each split that we have. And I'm not quite sure how that works, to be honest, because that's the other thing that we can play around with. But we can obviously also go down the route of, what is double this? 12. So we could up our shadow atlas to twice the size, which will up the resolution of our shadow maps by twice, which means, you know, double the amount of memory that we're using. But it also means that our we probably have to restart before that takes effect. But it also means that our shadows will be sharper. So it's a lot of figuring out what the best split ratios are for your game. Because again, this is a big problem that Godot has in trying to figure this out. Is if you're an open world, if you're building an open world game, you have to cast shadows on a much larger area. You need a much more aggressive split setting where you still make sure that you have the close objects casting shadow with high resolution high or precise enough resolution of your shadow maps, while the further ones you sacrifice some quality. While if you're doing an indoor game, you can get away with a lot more and upping that precision a lot more. I do believe that Godot 4 does a lot more adaptive shadow stuff, so that it does a lot of this automatically for you. I'm gonna go catch up with chat a little bit, because I've been talking a lot about just what these settings do. Yeah, so the normal bias, and again, one of the things that I find a bit of a shame is I know what all these settings are supposed to do in principle, but the exact calculations and how they work together, I know that the bias is really, how close to the thing that you cast that's casting a shadow are you, where a lower bias makes sure that you limit that light bleed as a result, but also introduces the risk of cell shadowing. While this is all about, okay, how do I break up my different levels of my shadow map depending on how much distance I cover. But yeah, try and play around with what they are. Yeah, so TriPlanner, that is indeed the way that I've dealt with that. Although TriPlanner is a really cool setting, but it doesn't always give the result that you want. There's nothing better, especially when it's proper objects. There's nothing better than properly UV unwrapping your objects. Obviously, your stretching of textures is because when you, for instance, have got a primitive cube, so just a cube mesh in Godot, your texture coordinates are fixed. So if you make your cube wider and you turn it into a rectangle, you're stretching that texture out. It's not tiling it any different. So with TriPlanner, you can fix that, because that will do a calculation where it uses the vertex position to figure out a texture coordinate there, but it is a planar projection. So from certain angles, I don't know if you can really see that here. I think you can really see that in my in here. You can actually see that at some of these, the textures start looking really weird, because that is the angle at which the TriPlanner mapping stops doing its thing. While for a flat space like the floor, the TriPlanner mapping is working just fine. And here I'm doing world TriPlanner, so even if I move something to the world, the texture sort of stays in place, which is great for floors and stuff like that. It's not great if you want to texture a chair. You don't want the texture moving when you move the chair. So, but there's especially for things like chairs and stuff like that, there's nothing better than properly unwrapping your objects, and then properly texture mapping them. So yeah, so reverse culling, there's very few situations where that really works very well, but it can help. It's a pain in the butt, really. So yeah, it's all about playing around with your biases, making sure that your objects have enough thickness to them that they actually that you don't have light bleed like this. I'm still not sure. I think it's because, I think because it just goes through the floor. We still have the fact that there's nothing shadowing it from this side, so it's purely the distance between those pixels and the front wall here being too close together, that even with that bias, it's still having problems figuring out that we actually shouldn't be having any light bleed there. And I'm pretty sure that with enough tweaking, you get the right settings that don't have this much light bleed. But yeah, it's a pain in the butt getting them right. That's definitely so. But anyway, I don't want to lose much more time on those. But those are basically what the settings do, what they're on about, and the sort of things that you need to start playing around with and tweaking to try and get some good results. And like I said, on open world, it's a pain in the butt to get it right. That also reminds me, I probably want to turn my shadow map back to a normal size. I might actually update that at some point in time. And actually I updated the wrong one. I should have updated that one. That one for the shadow atlas is actually for our spotlights and directional lights. And it's actually this one that's used for our directional. Sorry, this one's for spotlights and our omni lights. And this one's used for our directional shadow. So I think you end up with 4 textures at this resolution. So and they're square, right? So these are the 4 shadow maps of 4096 by 4096. I don't think they're cut up in any way. So yeah, upping that number, you can get more quality shadows over a larger area, but at the price of performance, because you're rendering a really big shadow map. Anyway, we were trying to make some doors work. Hakim, I don't know. What are you missing? We just had a bit of a detour, just having a quick chat about shadow maps and what settings there are and what they do and stuff like that. Let's get rid of our 2 little testing things. I don't know when my FPS is like completely gone here. That doesn't make any sense. Why am I? That's why. Whenever you suddenly get unexplained FPS drops like that, have a look at your logs, because especially when you're editing, because I use a lot of tool scripts, and tool scripts don't like you reloading scenes when you're switching between tabs, and it's sort of like cause a reload because we've updated subscenes. It starts getting things messed up. Okay, so that's still going bad. Why is that going bad? What's it actually saying? Shadow Atlas, find shadow. Alright, we've lost our Shadow Atlas because we've been mucking about with settings. You know what? I'm going to reload my project and see if that cleans that up. Alright. Let's see if it's happy this time. That's much better. Let's see, what sort of FPS are we on now? Oh yeah, that'll be right. Diving a little bit, but that's because we've got still got a few of these casting shadows. I think I've got these 2 setting shadows on, so it is building shadow maps in here from time to time. But yeah. Okay, so yeah, that's always something to be aware of. And also, be aware that if you do print statements in your code because you want to output something for debugging purposes, if it's a lot, and you see all of a sudden, every frame you're outputting 3 or 4 lines of messages into here, your game will suffer greatly, because you are introducing wait states on that data actually being output to the console. And all of a sudden, your game is idling most of the time, waiting for the I/O to finish, which is not something you want. So be aware of that. Be careful with that. I've actually had that with the game as well, where I was outputting what the missiles were doing, and that seriously slowed down the FPS of my game because it was just waiting on I/O the whole time. But we're no further to actually making our doors work. All right, let's have a look. Door. So we were defining on our door what our destinations are. So we need to go and start showing those destinations in some sort of UI where we can then interact with. But then we have a problem that once we're interacting with that, we're no longer having our raycast hit our door, and our door is going to close again. So we're going to have to solve that as well. But let's first get our UI up and running. I think that would be a good first thing, because I also want to see, can we get away with making our selection near our door, or are we going to be too far away from our door, which means we're going to have that selection. We're going to have to figure out something different from that selection. Or, you know, it means that we actually need to click on our door to indicate that we want to go somewhere, and that's when we get our selection. That's the other option, because then we can put it in front of the user somewhere. But I think first we need to go and get these into our UI. I'm surprised that you are running out of lights at 8, but Godot currently, I thought Godot currently has a limit of 16 lights that that can be affecting your scene at any given time, which is just a limitation of the lighting system that is currently used in Godot. And I'm not sure what's happening with Godot 4 there, whether that limit is being increased. But Godot 3 has a limit of 16 lights per object. So you could have, like, you know, 100 lights in your scene, but any object can only get light from 16 different light sources. So I am surprised to hear that you were having problems with turning more lights on, because I'm not even sure how many lights do we have here right now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Oh, we're only at 8 lights so far, so maybe 9. So I don't even have that many lights in here, but I had plenty of lights in my the little demo that I made for the mirror tutorial, where there were lights in just about every room, multiple lights there. But because there's only a couple lights at one given time that actually, you know, do things with what's visible on screen, it wasn't a problem. But if you put, you know, lots of lights very close to each other, then at some point Godot stops taking the lights into account. Because for every object that it renders, it can only have 16 lights lighting that object at any given time. As far as I'm aware, at least. All right. So, how are we going to do this? Well, I think we're going to start with just having something to render on. So we're going to go and get our viewport. No, that's a subscene. I think we're going to have to do some enhancements to this. Level selection. There we go. So now this one actually, not sure how big that should be. That's definitely too much. I don't know. I have a feeling this needs to be much smaller than that, but let's keep the resolution the way that it is. So I'm just going to put normal buttons on here, normal UI buttons. Eventually put some nice funky buttons on there. So that's again going to be like this, else we can't interact with it. And again, I'm wondering if we... I'm going to show it permanently right now just to get it working. But I think either we're going to have to bring this up, if there's more than one choice, bring this up when you click on the doors to indicate, I want to go into the turbo lift, and then we get to see it. Maybe even we move into the turbo lift at that point in time. I'm not sure yet. And then project this interface somewhere close to the user. or we make it pop out somewhere to the side. I'm not sure yet. Figure it out. Let's first get the UI to do something. Now, one other thing, I can set the level here, but I'm actually going to do something different in this case. I'm going to do editable children, and I'm going to put the I'm going to put the UI straight over here. All right. So there's our canvas layer. That's immediately selected from there. That's cool. So our canvas layer should get those sizes, I think. Okay, let's go 2D on this one. Let's start with a color rect on the background here. Now the big question that I have is, can I actually, where is that option? No. No, that's not what I wanted. Is that because I put it on a canvas later? Okay, let's change the type here. Control. All right, why am I not seeing what I was expecting to see? I was hoping that we could actually go and set that up and in sizing properly. Oh well, I guess not. So that's probably the problem with a viewport here. I don't think it's actually taking that from the viewport properly. Wonder about that. Anyway, let's not waste time on that. And right, because that is, so I do want to have this saved to a separate scene. Okay, save branch the scene. Rooms, components, door UI, there we go. And you know what, I'm just going to then go and put this in here after all. Seeing I can't interact with it anyway, there's no point in making my life more difficult. So here's our door UI, which is nice and white, very good. The thing that I find a bit of a downside of this is that we don't have a way to, at least I don't think so. Can I just go to edit here? No, it just goes to the resource. It doesn't go to the actual edit screen. Yeah, indeed. So yeah, it's I don't know if it's 16 lights in total and you can have 8 Omnia lights and 8 spotlights, or if it's just 16 lights in total. I'm not sure. It's but it is a limitation in how that works. Where's my door UI? I thought we saved it here. Yeah, that is sorted really strange. Okay, boom. All right, so now this is the thing that I find interesting is, you know, we can go full rec, but it doesn't have any sizing info right now because it has got no idea. So that's still called canvas, but it no longer is a canvas layer. So if I change that in there to a canvas layer, now it thinks it's the total size of my window here, which is, you know, the default size that we've set in our project settings. And I don't think I can overrule that here to tell it, like, you know, to tell it what the size actually is of the viewport that we're going to be rendering this in. So this is now too wide and too big. Now, I don't really mind too much because it will hopefully allow us to do what we do want to do here, which is I now want to go and add a VBox container in here. There we go. And in our VBox container, we're going to add buttons for each one of our options. So just to simulate that for now, we're just going to do a normal button here. We're going to say that's a test button. And then another button here, that's going to be our test 2 button. So every time that we add a button in here, it's going to automatically position that. Now the question that I have now is I actually want to have this centered. So do we then do that like this? And the big question is, if I now add a new button, no, it stays in that place. It doesn't actually recenter that. That's what I'm kind of hoping for, is that it would center based on the entire size. So I think we are going to have to manually calculate that positioning, which is a bit of a pain. But not, you know, not terribly problematic. Let's keep those in there just to help us position stuff. Unless I do it like this. There we go. Okay. So if we make that full rect, it's now going to position everything in the middle. And keep that positioned. Okay. So if I save that, and I'll go to our door. Now that hasn't updated yet because it doesn't know to do that. But I think if we reload, oh yeah, we can already see that it's updated there. Then our buttons are there. Now they're the wrong way around because our UI is the wrong way around. Which for now we can just solve by turning it 180 degrees. That sounds like you are running into problems with your FarPoint in here. So if I add a sphere in here, and we make a sphere really nice and big. No, that's only the outside that breaks off. It's not the inside that breaks off. Unless if I'm, if you're in the inside and we flip them around, flip faces. What do we get then at some point in time? This is annoying because I think I made it a bit too big. Let's make it. There we go. So we're now inside of here. So now you see that there's a hole coming in the middle, and that's because we've now reached the far point of our sphere, of our view. And you don't want to, you know, again, this is one of those trade-offs. And this is a real big problem that I have in my space game, because again, we're working on a really large scale in space. And the fact that I've set this to 4,000 means I can look 4 kilometers away. Well, 4 kilometers in space is nothing. You know, you look up in the sky and you see the moon. The moon is a lot more than 4 kilometers away. So that tells you something about the scale at which we see things. But if you put this really high, then you'll see that you'll start getting issues with objects really up close, where the rendering engine can't figure out anymore what's behind each other. and it'll start getting overdraw, and things start getting really ugly. And again, that's one of those trade-offs where, you know, we can only handle things at a certain scale and at a certain distance. Really annoying problem. And you need to find workarounds for those things. So one of the things, for instance, in my space game, it's unfortunate we're right in the middle of this that I can't currently run it. But I've got a planet in the background. And again, that planet is way further away, or in reality would be way further away than my draw distance. I think I've upped my draw distance to 8 kilometers, so 8,192, just to have a bit more visibility. But I can see my overdraw issues on my carrier as a result, because there's a lot of overlapping objects there that the rendering engine no longer knows what's in front of what. Because my depth buffers don't have enough precision anymore. So the thing that I've done, because that planet is supposed to be even way further, that's supposed to be hundreds of thousands of kilometers away. It's actually a really small planet. It's only about, I don't know, a kilometer wide, but it's fixed in space relative to the player's position. So as the player moves, the planet moves, and because therefore it's stays in the same position as far as the player is aware. The player is under the illusion that that planet is actually much farther away than it is. It's far enough away that stereoscopic vision no longer tells us the distance, and it fools us enough that that planet seems to be far enough away. So that's it's a pretty cool little trick. It doesn't help you with your planet thing though. Yeah, floating point rounding errors, they are really annoying at that scale, at that level. So yeah, here we got our buttons, all however many of them. So yeah, these we now need to change depending on how many floors we actually have to go to. But our scaling seems to work. It's nicely centering this, so it does apply. The fact that I've made this fit the entire area, it does apply that to the actual space that it has available. That's pretty cool. Now, one other question, of course, is do we want to leave that somewhat transparent or not? That's not going to immediately show up until we reopen that. I don't know yet. Depends a bit on where we're going to place it. I might not even make this transparent at all. I think we're not going to make that a transparent thing. So I'm just going to turn the transparency off. There we go. It has to re-render it. Boom. Sweet. They're all test 2. Yes, they're all test 2. So we're going to get rid of these buttons. Bloomy. There we go, and that means that here we're going to go and set these, I think. So this is probably something that I'm only going to want to do I always forget where that is. Oh, it's just editor hints. Okay. Why is it not auto-completing? Actually, if editor hints, we're going to return here. Yeah. Yeah, it's a property. So that's... Oh, engine. Engine, that's the one I was looking for. Oh, that is what it is. Is it? Engine, yeah. Typed it wrong. I thought I was typing an editor. Okay, that's cool. No, you can't do that for the atmosphere. It depends a bit. Are you rendering the atmosphere from outside, so you're outside and looking at a planet, or is your atmosphere for I'm standing on the ground and I want to render the atmosphere around me? Because one of the things that you can do to, because it's something that I did for the atmospheric shader, where you're actually working on a completely different scale for the atmosphere. But inside of the shader, it doesn't care whether you're using the same scaling as outside of it, to actually get the logic for your atmosphere shader to work correctly. But you then need to make sure that your what I'm trying to think of, that even though the atmosphere sphere is much bigger, that in the output of your vertex shader, you make sure that the Z value that is written into your depth buffer is cut off at a certain distance, so that it's always the furthest point being drawn, but it's still within your 4,000 or whatever far distance you have. And I think I've done the same thing in my planet to make the planet always the furthest away, even if it's not. Because again, the thing is a kilometer wide, so if my enemy would fly into the planet, then all of a sudden my enemy would disappear and it will break the illusion. So let me have a quick look at where my planet is. I can't remember where I put that. Did I put it somewhere in here? Misc? No. Okay, let's open up my testing. It takes a minute to load, but that's fine. So here's my planets. Whoa! So you can see that the planet is a proper sphere, but we have a shader material. Now here, I think I needed to do a little bit more. No, I did. So what I'm doing here is, first of all, in render mode, I am turning on skip vertex transform. That means that I am now responsible for placing the vertex correct and doing all the calculation. And that means the vertex, the normal, binormal, tangent, I think those four. Now, I'm not updating the binormal and the tangent here because I'm not doing any normal mapping or anything like that. So here I'm purely calculating the vertex position and the normal position myself by applying the model view matrix. Because normally Godot would do that after your part of the vertex shader runs, and then with the vertex output of that, it would do these two lines, and then the same for the binormal and tangent. And it would also run this line of code, which is then applying the projection matrix to that output. And again, by doing this, I'm now allowed to do that thing, and Godot will no longer do this step. But simply by assigning the position variable, which is a very special variable in our shader, by assigning that, it turns off Godot's own logic for doing the projection with the projection matrix. So here we're applying the projection matrix, and that's basically taking our 3D coordinate and then changing that into the 2D unified coordinate that is sent to the fragment shader, and that is eventually then converted to a coordinate on screen. Now, the nice thing about that is that it doesn't just create the X and Y value unified again, between -1 and 1 instead of your screen resolution. So that is eventually converted to screen resolution, but the output of your vertex shader is still in unified space. So it doesn't just calculate the X and the Y, it also calculates the Z, which is your input for your depth buffer, and it calculates the W, which is again a variable that's calculated based on the distance to do perspective correct texture mapping. And it's actually, the depth buffer is then filled by, or actually the X, Y, and Z are then divided by W before it's actually applied. So what I'm doing here is a very dirty trick, because I know that the Z value is going to be divided by W. I'm making sure that that Z value is as close to W as I can get, which is why I'm multiplying by 0.9999. I can't do W because then, let's say that this is 1,000, and it will be 1,000 divided by 1,000. That will be 1, and 1 is one bit too high to actually be evaluated. If it's exactly 1 or larger than 1, then your fragment is discarded as too far away. It's no longer rendered. So yeah, I needed to make it 1 smaller. Now this is a bit of a cheap way of doing it. There is probably a better way of doing it, but this works very good enough. But the end result here is that if you have anything that you render, even if it's much closer to your camera or even if it's too far away from your camera, it will render as if it's at the maximum distance. Now, if you have 2 overlapping things, he's not going to know which one's in front. So obviously, this only works for something like this. Now, when you look at a sphere that you render your atmosphere with, this is again a really good trick to make sure that every fragment is rendered at the maximum distance to as far as your depth buffer is concerned. And because it's on that projection line, it doesn't really matter. It's just a trick. And that could also even mean that if you look at your atmosphere sphere, you could center that on your player. You could even make that a child of your camera. Well, that's probably not a good idea because then it would rotate. But you could make sure that it's positioned at the same position as your camera. And then you could make a sphere that is slightly smaller than... Does it matter? No, it can actually be as big as you want, because as long as it's inside your bounding box, it'll get rendered. And you can make sure that it's rendered at the farthest position in your environment. And yeah, that does mean that if you have objects that pass that boundary, they will disappear. Then again, they would already disappear the moment that they're further away than your far buffer. So yeah, that's a really neat trick to make sure that you don't get into trouble. That if you want to render something at the maximum distance, but you don't want it to be clipped out because it goes beyond your far position, then this is a way to work around that problem. It's a cheap way, it's a trick, but it works. So that's a nice one to know. Glad you find that one useful. All right, so I'm gonna rename this to Door UI, and then I'm gonna go and add a script to this. There we go. All right. All right. Actually, I'm just going to call that buttons, whatever. Which now means that on our door, boom, here we want to go and call, I think that one is going to be scene instance dot, what do we call it? Make buttons destinations. Boom. All right, cool. Actually, I want to get . that out of there first. We're gonna eventually connect to some signals there as well. So this is one of the things I designed this to actually have my scene as a variable here, which makes it a little bit harder to access. The other option that I have is to do that editable children trick and just add the scene underneath the viewport. I really wish there was a way to actually just add it as a child scene here, but be able to then make it actually have an anchor point in my subscene. But yeah, Godot doesn't do that, but that's all right. This is another way to do it. So yeah, we get our array here. So this is where we want to then start creating our buttons. So button in buttons, I believe that is. So here we're going to add a child, new button. Haven't created that yet. So a new button is .new. I think it's button.new, but I could be wrong. This button. No, let's see. It'll complain if it's not. Let's just assign the text and see what it adds in there. Let's just run and see if it runs. AR toolkits. Did I type that in wrong? So, as far as I know, nobody currently is working on a port for AR toolkit in Godot. There was someone looking into it last year, but I think that person wanted to do that as part of the Summer of Code from Google. And well, you know, we've got limited slots, and there are a lot of applications. So unfortunately, that project didn't make the cut. So yeah, I don't think there's anybody currently focusing on AR Toolkit. Now, obviously, there's ARKit, so Apple's ARKit, that one's working. I'm still looking into AR Core, so Google's AR Core. That's mostly working, but we had the problem that the way that AR Core works, the way that you have to put your APK together, that meant that your application became an AR Core application, whether you use it or not, which meant that any game that would be released with Godot, if we would have pursued that course, would have become an AR Core game, even if you're not making an AR Core game, which I don't think would have made many people happy. Now, with all the work that Fredia and Jean have done in changing the plugin structure on Android, and offering a more capable but also more complex plugin structure, which is now, for instance, used by the Quest plugin. That had the same problem, you know, with the Quest. You have to include Oculus's SDK in your project, and that turned it into a Quest application. So that needs to be a plugin. That needs to be a separate thing. So Fredia made a whole system around that. He's now done the port of my AR Core logic into that structure. And we're trying to get the final pieces together to actually make that run. Now, the problem here is that Fredia is in America, I'm here in Australia. So finding the time that we're both online has proven a little bit difficult. But as soon as we find an hour that we're both online, hopefully we'll figure out the last little things that aren't working properly, and we'll have a working environment for that. And hopefully once we have that done, we should have AR Core as a plugin pretty quickly. Knock on wood, hopefully. We're very close, but we haven't done it. But AR Toolkit is something that, as far as I'm aware, nobody's working on right now. Oh, right in the chat. Okay. Oh, I've lost. My stream is all of a sudden. Oh, it's just not updating. Okay, that's cool. So nobody to knowledge is working. There you go. So, all right, what am I doing wrong here? I've got a function, make buttons, but I can't call it here yet. Now, what I think is going wrong here is a timing issue. Because, let's go and make that bigger so I can see what's going on. So, when we go ready here, we are setting up our scene. Then again, our error said that it knew what it was doing. So I'm just assuming that this ready gets called before this ready. So our get scene instance, that's a function here, which returns our instantiated scene, which is our node. And we should be able to call make buttons on there because we got that there. So did I just see the error wrong? Maybe I just didn't save. No, I did go there. So make buttons and canvas layer door UI. Cannot go. Oh, cannot convert the nil to array because we don't have one here. So we should only do this if we have destinations, because of course we haven't set this up for all the doors. So the doors that this isn't set up for, we can't create any buttons for. All right. So we have our UI on our door, but it's way too far away to actually make sense of. So this is the problem that, you know, right now I've got the player sitting right here. So either that door is going to be a problem or that door is going to be a problem, depending on where we are in the room. Right now they're both a problem, because once we put something on that door, that will be too far away. Now, one thing that we could do is we could make the text bigger, which we probably need to do anyway, you know, just like we've got the text bigger over there. But the big question also is it something we want to have shown? That door is really... This is because I keep going onto our button bar. So, all right. I think our buttons need to become or get a bigger text. And I think I'm going to make our... I'm going to make this a different size because we're never going to have that many buttons on there anyway. So that's 2, 1. So that's perfect. This still has the old UI from before we cleared out all the buttons. That's funny. So we need to start doing some things here. Now, I am going to add one button here so we can see what our properties are. Because obviously we now want to do, we're going to create a font for this. Let's actually not do that here. Delete node. We'll just find the help. I'm going to clean out a few of these things because it's getting a little bit full of stuff. I'm also going to zoom out. I can't multi-select here. Okay. Just want to close a few things that we're currently not working on. Oh, I do want that one. Okay. Okay. All right. So search button. Okay. So where is our font set? Because it looks like that might actually go way back. Here we go. Is this it? Where are our font sets? Font, is it just that one? Okay, I do need my button here for a sec, because I need to know what the property is. Custom fonts, font of the button's text. Okay, so why couldn't I find that in my help? This was I just not looking good. Yeah, it's a problem. Yeah, I need to get back to the car game. There we go. All right. So how does that work with this? Because here you just have the normal font of the button text. Oh, that wasn't what I had in mind. What is the theme? I'm missing something here. Oh. Hold on, what was it called? We had it in the pop-up. The whole reason I did this. Custom fonts / font, okay. See, that doesn't work. So weird. So we have a get font, as font override. So how do we set the font on a button in code? That's a really good question. I'll move that around. Used to be able to drag that into code. Yeah, so how do we do this? So it's part of the theme. No, but it's in project settings. Okay. Okay. So those are the theme properties, but how do we access the theme properties? I don't think that's what we're looking for. Because that's on the theme here. That's if we set a theme. But we've got a custom font that we're trying to set. So that's only on the theme. Okay, so sets property. Hold on, there is a, there we go. Set. We're just gonna do it like that. And then here we're gonna do export fonts. Okay. And we're actually gonna go and set it up here. Boom. So that should apply the font to every button that we create. Now we're also gonna have our one measly button over there. That'll do. Alrighty. It doesn't seem to have done much. It's definitely not the larger font that I'm expecting to see. Okay. Now it's possible that maybe we actually don't have our doors here. Okay, door, level selection. Oh, because I put it in the door UI. Okay, that's fine. Let's maybe maybe don't make that an export. Let me just do get, preload. File system, where are fonts, assets, fonts, this one. But let's see if that wants to work. Okay. How are we now? Where's my resets? There we go. No, still not working. We have now the right number of buttons, but doesn't like. So that means that we've got a typo somewhere. I really need to go through these again too and figure out why it's having those problems. Okay. So let's see if we got the name right over there. S. There's an S in there. Okay. Hopefully it's just that. Yay! Now we have big text. Now we also have a viewport that's too small, but we have nice big text. All right. Cool. We're getting somewhere. We are getting somewhere. So, door. So this one definitely needs to be a bit bigger. That one needs to be a bit bigger. I want to leave that and make sure that that's the right scale, or else we get stretching. And I want to get rid of this one. All right. So, let me think. That was too quick. I need to see something else. That is pressed. Okay. All right. So we get a signal when it's pressed, but it's not telling us who it's pressing. So how do we know which of the buttons is sending us a signal that it's being pressed? Because the thing, of course, is I want to go and have this guy give a signal. Door pressed, which, so that we can see which one is being pressed, and we can send out a signal and we can tell it which one it is. But you know, we can connect to this button, so we can go and say func button pressed pass, and we can now say new button dot connect. When we don't have enough space. So we're gonna connect to the button pressed signal, and let me double check. That is what it's called, right? Pressed, not button pressed, pressed. Okay. And that is now going to call this. But inside here, we don't know which one of our three buttons was pressed, because they're all going to call the same function. So how are we going to know which button was being pressed? All right. Let's see if there's anything in our state. So just put a breakpoint there We're now going to go and press on one of our buttons. And hopefully if we've done everything right. Oop. Okay, I don't know which button I'm going to be pressing on. I think, oh, look at that. We can, because we see the color change. Boom. So we do need something with that as well. But self. Who is self? Is self our UI scene? Or is self the thing? No, self is our UI scene. That's inside there. Okay. So we got to change how that works. That's not going to do what it is that we want to do. Now there's a simple way to work around this problem, and it actually solves a different issue as well. But I can't say I'm happy that I need to do it this way. So we are going to go and change this to button. There we go. Boom. And we're going to call this door button. There we go. And we're going to go and save this. We need to make some subfolders for these things, but for now, we're going to keep it like this. It's fine. There we go. Actually, we don't care about any of this stuff. So the nice thing is that we can actually style this thing. There we go. We can go into fonts and we can say load up the fonts. There we go. We've got a font in there. Boom. We have a door button with a font. But more importantly, we can now say node pressed. Okay, so this means I need to do this differently. We're going to go change the type to a control. And we're going to put our button underneath our control. That one we're going to call test. That one we're going to give our font. There we go. And that one we can now go in. Come on. Connect up to this. Boom. Actually, we're just going to call it pressed. And we're going to call that which. Okay. So door pressed. Emit signal. Door pressed, comma, button text. So we're going to cheat here. We're just going to use the text of the button. We're also going to say func set text, new text, button text is new text. There we go. And actually, let's go export. Oh, hold on. Haha. That was why. This is control. That's right, because we originally created it like that. So this means we can do pressed. Now it won't give me an error on that anymore. Export string var text is tests. There we go. Text is new text if button text. There we go. And I'm not going to worry right now about setting them in ready because the only place where we're using this is over here. So we actually no longer need you. But we do need a nice little button scene here is preload, and that is now, where are you? Like I said, we should really reorganize a lot of these things. It's getting a bit of a mess around here, but there's a button. So now this becomes instance. There we go. So that stays the same. We don't care about that anymore because we're doing that inside of that. New button. We're going to leave pressed, button pressed. We're going to say which. Don't care about you anymore. Emit signal. Door pressed. Which. We just pass it down the tree, so it's a bit signal back, signal back, signal back. But that's just what it is. Ah, my stream analytics is going a bit haywire. How are we for time? We need to start putting an end to this. Well, once we've got this door button thing working, then that's where we're going to end it tonight. And then obviously next time we're going to continue with it actually making the player move. Okay, so what we now need to do is in the door itself. So here's our scene instance. What we're now also going to do, instance.connects door pressed self door pressed. We're just going to keep the name the same. Actually, I want to have this on the top. Func door pressed which. And we're just going to output this so that we can see whether it is doing what we hope that it's doing. Oh, that's screwed up. Okay, so the problem that we're having, I think. All right, that's not cool. I think the problem that we're having is because I've now made that underneath this control node, our VBox is no longer able to handle the size. Oh, this sucks. So I do need to change this back to a button. Okay, we're gonna go and let's actually just copy this first. Copy. Paste. There we go. And you can go. Delete. Okay. Then we actually don't need this anymore because we're going to use that from thing. So this now does need to become door pressed. This one needs to become door pressed. I think this will work. It's a little ugly, but what do you do? So we're now going to go and connect that up to itself. Oh yeah, because we renamed the bloody thing. There we go. All right, so that should all work, but that means that here now we are going to go and do that. Call that, and now we should be able to tell which one is being called. Let's see if that works better. And I think we still have our test button in there, so I need to remove that too. Here we go. Now we have. So yeah, we do need a pointer of sorts because it's very hard to know what we're aiming for. But there we go. Player quarters. Let's see if that has ended up in our log. So door was player quarters. So that bit works. Which now works over here. Well, this is a lot of passing the buck back up the tree. Let's just do it like this. No, actually, this is still a door. So we're gonna just parse it through. Emit signal. Oops, door pressed. Why does it need to do that? Come on, which? There we go. Which now means in our bridge. There's our door. We've got a door pressed. Here we go. And here we are going to go and give that a signal back. We're going to call that change level or change room. Boom. Emit signal change room, which, and I think I actually need to rename that that one. But now we can, do we have a script on here? Yes, we do. Hold on. Oh yeah, we need to find the node. Okay, cool. So this is going to be on change room, which var node is get node. Remember, we kept the names all the same. And if you find the node, we change to that room. Let's see. Now this is going to be an ugly teleport. This is not how I want to make it work, because this is going to be instantaneous. We're going to make that change room do a fade out, fade in thing. Yeah. So let's go. All right. So that didn't work. Now the question is, why didn't it work? So I want to go there. And if we, for some reason, don't get far enough, there's our dumb set of errors for that. I still need to figure that one out. Yeah, let's try this again. Hey, and we're in the cafeteria. Haha. So obviously we don't have that door set up. We don't have that our thing is being shown in the right place depending on where we are. But we moved into our other room. Come on. Yeah. So I think I'm going to leave it there tonight, because it is already almost 12:30. I didn't want to make it too late today, but our principal logic is starting to come together. So we now have a way to identify where we want to go. I'm not happy yet with how it looks and how it generally works. Obviously, one of the things that I need to change is that if you click on the door and you only have one destination, we just go to the destination and we don't even show our viewport. The other thing that we need to do is that I really only want the viewport to show when you're looking at the door. It is tempting to have it next to the door like an index, but I think that because the doors are relatively far away, and we need to therefore oversize the buttons, I just don't think that is practical. That is the way that it should work. So I'm more inclined to say that when you're looking at the door and our menu comes up, is that we show the menu actually in the near the player, so that it's like a sort of like a zoom in function that you're looking at the options nice and close to you, and it's therefore becomes easier to make a selection out of those options. So that is definitely something where I want to take a closer look at what my options are there to improve on that. Obviously, now we're changing the room. We have to make sure that our location and our destination is right, because we were standing the wrong way around. Although that gives us another problem, is that if we're in the cafeteria and we want to exit the cafeteria, we have to turn around. Now, that is fine for me. I've got a room set up here. But for someone who's just working, just looking at forward, because they've got a setup, which is really good for this sort of game, where you're just sitting in a chair and you got your headset on and you just have like the original Rift tracking, or you you target PSVR or something like that. Although unfortunately Godot doesn't work with PSVR yet. That's still a wish of mine that we get there at some point. Then having to look behind you isn't really a good design choice. So having the door behind you, if you go into cafeteria and turn the player around so that they're facing forward and looking to the bartender or whoever we want to interact with, if they have to then turn around in order to go back out the door, that doesn't make sense. So we'll have to place the door to the side so that it's, the player just needs to look sideways and then is able to select the door and go back to the bridge. But again, that's also one of the reasons why we're just blocking out our scenes, because if we had modeled an entire cafeteria and then we figure out like, hey, hang on, I'm being transported in this cafeteria and I now have to turn around in order to leave, that's not good design. We're too far down the pipeline, right? While now I know that that is not a good design choice, so I know that I need to either position the player differently or I need to position the door differently to make sure that the player enters the cafeteria, is looking in the right direction to interact with the NPCs that are there, but also has an easy way out by looking sideways and saying, there's my door, I'm going to leave the cafeteria. I don't have to look around behind my chair. Now, obviously, that does mean that we very quickly, in our cafeteria scene, we do want to change a few things. The first thing is we're using our head position as a helper. So if I just temporarily add a camera to this, then I can see, that's how our player is transported into this room. So the first thing that we want to do is you want to make sure that the player is looking the other way around. The other thing that I want to do is, right now the player is 1 meter above the ground. So I want the player to be a bit higher. That actually needs to become the default position. Oh, that should not have changed on the camera. That needs to change on the head position because we're going to delete the camera in a minute. So let's turn the camera around and place the camera up a bit. So now our camera is facing the right way. Our camera is at the right height, so that's where we get transported to. But like I said, our door is actually in the wrong position. Now I might want to even go and move our player a little bit to the right. So the idea is that there's going to be like a bar here with a bartender behind there so that we can talk to the bartender. There'll be some bar stools around where we might have our NPCs sitting and we can interact with our NPCs. So I think that actually this door should be on this side. So I can now very quickly go and grab my turbo lift, move that out of the way, go, that's the wrong way. I need the green circle, rotate it 90 degrees, and we're gonna now put it over here. Oh, that's not, that is because, there we go. There we are. So now we need to make a hole. And there we can see that we actually need to go and move this guy a little bit further down like that. Perfect. So now we can go and grab this guy. Let's go and move our door in position. There we go. Now, as we're doing that, I actually want to make sure that we position in such a way that our menu is showing the right way, so we can start working on that. And now we grab these two guys, rotate these two guys by 90 degrees. That's interesting. Oops. Okay, I'm not quite sure how we managed to get those misaligned. It's probably because I am moving them while I've got them both selected, so they weren't rotating around the correct correct location. Anyway, we now have our turbo lift to the right, so we're standing over here. We'll be able to look at, you know, whoever the patrons are over here. Maybe we have the bar over here with the bartender behind it that we'll be able to talk to. We'll have our other NPCs sitting on the also bar stools, and we'll be able to talk to them. Or we can look to the right and we can leave this area again. That does mean that just for our layout here, I'm gonna want to move this a little bit more like this. Again, this isn't really important because we're not going to be in any sort of locations that are. I'm just gonna actually want to keep moving that over here, but I just wanted to sort of generally have them in a location that makes sense. But they don't really doesn't really matter where. But that is one of those things where, you know, we won't know until we start playing around with it. That's something that for the bridge as well, the fact that the doors are pretty far on both ends. So maybe I will make the bridge smaller and make it longer so that we actually have it extend more forward. Which again means I look to the left, I can go to the cafeteria or the crew quarters or the observation deck. I can look to the right to start my briefing. Might mean that we move the briefing room more forward. We might move the turbo lift more forward so that I don't have to turn my head that far. So these are the reasons why you block out scenes. That you still have very simple shapes that you can easily reorganize, easily move around. We're purely just interested in the general layout of our environment and how we navigate through this environment. We're not at all interested or caring about the look of it. Obviously the interaction we do care about. So again, this is also where just using simple UI elements like the buttons allows us to get the UI working right, and then we can start figuring out, okay, how can we make it look nice? So that is a next step thing. So yeah, I'm going to start hooking the rest of this up. I'm not going to improve the actual moving from one room to another. I think that is something that I really want to do on stream. You know, go through the whole process of blacking out the screen, moving the player in the new location, fading back in so that you get a more comfortable teleport into the new location instead of this instant teleport, because this instant teleport in VR is going to make people very uncomfortable. And even on a desktop game, you know, just suddenly moving from one room to another without some sort of transition is generally something that people don't enjoy. So that's something that I think next week's stream we're going to start looking at techniques to make that more comfortable. I'll hook up all the other all the other doors by then and polish that up a little bit more so that next week we can jump straight into the moving around, and then hopefully also get to a point where we'll just go to the next step in the briefing room. You know, we won't have the whole cinematic stuff done. That's for much later down the line. But at least if we're in the briefing room, we have a button to press that moves us to the hangar, which has a button to press, which then loads up the test scene, and we can fly around. So that we basically have the whole thing completed. And then we need to start putting content in there and tweaking it, and you know, start working on the rest of the menu interaction and that sort of thing. Yes, I did, and I really need to return back to it. But if you look on my GitHub page, you will find my procedural mesh generator, which allows you to draw a visual graph to generate all sorts of meshes. This rope bridge, I believe, is in the sample project. That is probably the the most complete example that I have of what you can do with this. So this is a bridge where by tweaking a couple of parameters you can make the bridge longer, you can make the arch deeper, you can change the size of everything, you can change how many planks there are, how much randomness there is to the positioning of the planks. Yeah, pretty happy with what I did back then, but it really needs a revamp. It actually needs a redesign because this was the first version that I did. The biggest thing to keep in mind, once you compile, because this is the native plugin that you need to compile with C++, you create a mesh instance, and then you create an array mesh, and then you put this as a script on the array mesh. And that's where it usually goes wrong, because it's too easy to accidentally put the script on the mesh instance, and there's no protection in GD native against that. So when you do that, you're using a mesh instance as if it's an array mesh, and the whole thing just blows up in your face, and it just crashes out. So that is one of the examples where it really needs a proper setup. And proper tooling and stuff like that. The other thing which I really wanted to do at some point in time is nested generators. So right now you have this really big plan where you generate something and you really want to say, well, hey, these things are actually a unit that I want to reuse. So I'm gonna nest these things. So those are all things that I wanted to add at some point in time. I just never got the time to actually complete it. So, but it's a nice tool. It's a nice experiment. It does what it does pretty well, in my opinion. If I start from scratch, I would probably do it very differently. But there's a lot in there that is very usable. So, yeah, I do hope to pick that up again Monday. All right. So. All right, I think we've got all our basic things set up right now, and now it's a lot of tweaking and perfecting and putting some stuff in there, some temporary placeholders to get a bit of a feel of where things need to be. So I'm going to start adding stuff into the bridge. I'm going to start adding stuff into the briefing run. And again, the same principle is going to apply. It's all going to be primitive shapes. So one of the ideas that we talked about earlier that I really want to do is in the briefing room, instead of everybody sitting looking at that screen, I'm probably going to remove that screen, and instead we're going to put a big round table in the middle, and we're going to put chairs around there, and you're going to be sitting on one of those chairs. When the briefing starts, the other NPCs are going to see sitting on the other chairs, and we're going to have a holographic table in the middle, big holographic scene. That means that for now, that table is just going to be a cylinder, nothing more. The chairs might be, a really dinky couple of boxes together to have the shape of a chair. That's not going to be what's going to be in the game. That's going to be very easy to put together, very quickly flung together assets just to get the concepts of these rooms right, to get the scaling right, to get the positioning right, so that we can figure out where things go. And if we're on the wrong track, we lose 15 minutes and we redo it instead of losing hours of modeling a beautiful room and then going, this is not the room that I want, I'm going to throw it away. That's the goal of blocking levels out and just using a very simple placeholder art to get everything into position, to get the scaling right, to get the dimensions right, to get the everything, to get all the ingredients in place and know what it is that you really want. And then comes the step that we're gonna start to a 3D modeler and say, well, here's the ugly version. Go and model something nice for us. This now needs to look futuristic and needs to be within a certain theme, and we'll get there. So that's the plan. And again, this is not all going to be finished next week. This is going to be weeks of slowly tinkering away at this. So. Exporting the game. I don't have any experience with actually uploading a game to, say, the the Apple Store or the Android Store, where there is a whole bunch of requirements. I have done a lot of exporting stuff out of Godot just to test run, so to test things on my iOS device or to test something on my on one of my Android devices. The difficulty level is all about, are you using anything custom? If you are using plain vanilla Godot and you're not using any sort of plugins that has special requirements, especially on Android, plugins on Android are a pain in the butt. Custom build versions of Android is just that's where that Android build template now comes into play. That does make things a lot easier, but it's very poorly documented at this point in time. Well, I wouldn't say easier. It is actually a pretty convoluted process, but it is a sensible process. It is turning this into something how Google wants you to put your application together. But it's not for someone who just wants to press a button and export. But if you are working with plain vanilla Godot, then obviously you need to set up your export here. So let's name Android as an, obviously our game isn't going to work on Android unless I ever port it to the Quest. But you get that, and you see that normally there will be a whole bunch of options here. Now I've installed all the templates, so that's always the very first step that you do. Is that not in here as an option? Is that in editor? Export templates. Here we go. So you have to go into export templates. Again, this is a custom build. And you can see that I have a custom template installed there. But if you download 3.2.3 official release, you should now see here that you have the option to install the official 3.23 export templates. The moment that you install that, everything should be available for exporting. The other thing, and this is Android only, is that here you have a whole bunch of settings that you need to set up for Android. Again, assuming that you need to use Android. Now, this is where things get very convoluted. You have to have Android Studio installed. Google changes Android Studio about just about every major release, and they change things, and it falls apart, and suddenly we need new instructions for a whole bunch of things. You need a JDK environment, and you basically just need one tool out of it, jar signer. The thing is, we need ADB, we need jar signer, and we need a key store and the tools to create a key store. Those are the three ingredients that we need, and those are parts of bigger installs that you have to install on your computer, for which Android Studio is by far the most annoying because Google. Once you create a key store, you have to put in your debug stuff, and away you go. So yeah, I can't really help much more with the Android thing, because again, like I said, with every Android Studio version it changes. I'm just happy that the bloody thing works. But it's that export templates. Make sure you've got those installed, and then it's a matter of making sure that these guys are configured correctly. So yeah. So MagRacer is still under development. What are these guys called? Got so many channels. You can see that I'm an Apex fan. Where do we find these guys? So everybody is now going to know who I love here. That's okay. So Canopy Games, MagRacer Project Q&A. So here you can find everything about what Jan is doing. Facebook is the best place to find info. He posts a lot on the Godot Facebook page about what he's working on. So have a look at what he's doing. He's planning to do a whole course on this thing as well. It is a paid course though, so yeah, that's one of the things. So yeah, the other thing that I will say about exporting is, where are you? Yeah, That's scrappy. That's not what I'm after. Exporting projects. There we go. So here we have all the chapters for exporting to the different platforms. So if you go to exporting for Android, you'll find all those things that I was talking about. You need developer Android. You need OpenJDK, the right version. Here's the key. Here's the command that you need to execute to get your debug key store. You have to make sure you got ADB, so that's going to be installed by Android, but you got to find out where it is. Like I said, every major version, the location changes because Google likes to change everything every version they do. So it's always a bit of a search. So then it says, you got to go to those editor settings, find Android, make sure you fill in those 3 things, find your ADB, find your jar signer, find your key store that you created. The other thing which is really important, no, that's not important for exporting, that's only important for building. You have to set up a couple of environment variables, but they're not here. Then there's a whole bunch of information that is important. So like I said, I've never actually exported to the Play Store, so I've never followed these instructions. I've never had to do that. But there's a whole bunch of requirements to make sure that you have all those images set up. You have to set up a privacy statement document. I think you have to set up a whole bunch of privileges settings and stuff like that. A lot is actually inside of the export settings. But yeah, Android is by far the most annoying platform to export to. All the other ones, when you iOS is a little bit difficult as well. But the nice thing about iOS, the export for iOS will actually create an Xcode project. So you have to obviously have a Mac. That's the biggest problem with iOS. If you don't have a Mac, can't deploy to iOS. It sucks. I know there's a lot of Linux developers out there who don't want to go out and buy a $4,000 MacBook just so that they can publish something on their iPhone. But that's exactly what you need to do. You gotta find, secondhand MacBook. That's the only way to do things on iOS, because you need to have Xcode installed. But from Godot, the iOS export creates an Xcode project that then opens up an Xcode, and Xcode does the rest. And here I have to hand it to Apple. If you have your developer account set up with Apple, the whole setup of that and making sure that you have everything in place is an automated process with Apple. Apple does almost all the work for you in order for you to actually push your game out to your phone, and has a whole interface to make it as easy as possible to then upload your game to the App Store. Again, I don't have any experience with that last step. Never published a game on iOS. I've only been testing on iOS devices. I don't have any experience with HTML5, so I'm not going to talk about that. Mac OS X, I believe, is a similar process to iOS, but with a lot less overhead. Obviously, your Windows is one of the easiest. As long as you've got your templates installed, it will export. And the same with Linux. As long as you've got your templates installed, Linux is probably the simplest one of all of them. With Windows, I think you have. Yeah, you got a couple of code sign stuff that you can set up if you want to do the automatic code signing. That's important when you actually want to publish a game. If you want to put it into a store or something, you generally have to code sign it. But you don't have to if you just want to run it locally. So that's all fine. The other thing to be aware of is the texture format settings. I think on Android you don't have a choice. Or are they somewhere at the bottom? Yeah, I think Android doesn't give you a choice. I think Android always exports for a specific texture format. I think the defaults work in most cases, but there are some situations, especially when you are exporting for Glass 2. I think you needed to use one of the ETC texture formats to actually export. But don't hold that to me, because I'm not 100% sure. Now, obviously, when you create your game in the editor, that's one of the reasons why it takes so bloody long to to import new textures because it's creating all those different versions of the texture. But when you're exporting, it wants to only export the ones that you actually need. But means ticking the right box, and I'm not quite sure if that's documented anywhere. But that's potentially a reason. If you run your game and nothing's textured, then you've exported it with the wrong texture format. Hey Alan, yeah. Sorry, I'm already rounding off. It's almost one, so I'm already an hour over what I wanted to do. But we're having a quick chat about exporting games because CML is having problems with it. So yeah, CML, if you we're gonna put an end to this in a minute. But leave a comment on the video if you've got some more questions about the export process. If you're stuck on a specific thing, I might be able to point you in the right direction. I don't know. For the most part, it works pretty well out of the box. It's just you have to have those templates installed, and with Android, you have to install a whole bunch of extra things. Android's the pain in the butt, and especially when you look at Android, a lot of people want to use ads in their games or that sort of features, and they're not embedded in Godot by default because of the proprietary nature of those APIs. We just can't. It's annoying. We wish it was different. So they come in the form of either custom built copies of Godot, which on Android, if you follow the instructions, you get there. I've had to because I've done it for AR Core, and I'm now going through the whole new process with the more complex but more powerful template system. It's not for the faint-hearted, but it is doable. And again, it all depends on what are you running into, what are you doing, what is the problem in your specific scenario that you are having issues with exporting. If you're using plain vanilla Godot, it should really be a press of a button. Once these entries are set up, especially that I have to say, one of the things that I really like about Android that I was really surprised at, that really works very nicely, is if you have Android Studio properly installed, you've got all the settings in the right place, and you've added this, you just get a little Android button over here when your phone is connected, and you press the little button and your game runs on your phone. Can't be much more easier than that. But yeah, getting to the point where it's then all a one-click thing, there's just a lot of ingredients to it. And I don't know how the other game engines do it. I do know that the other game engines are able to have licenses with Google to include some of the build system. So we're not allowed to have a copy of Jar Signer or a copy of ADB inside of Godot. It's you run into copyright issues. I don't know which ones are, because OpenJDK is obviously an open source Java environment, so maybe including the jar signer of OpenJDK might be a possibility. But I definitely think ADB is part of Google's ecosystem. So I don't think we can just include that in a Godot distribution and take that out of the requirement of having that installed. So, but then again, download Android Studio and install it and do a search where adb.exe is, and you're there. So it's doable. Anyway, thank you all for watching. I hope you guys learned something or picked up something, found it interesting that we're doing. Obviously, this stage of development is a bit tiresome. It's just part, there's a lot of setup involved here and a lot of tedious things that we have to do a couple of times. So that's also what I'm trying to do as much as I can of that part during the week instead of on stream. But yeah, we had to get a few things in place. So yeah, next week we're going to continue on the door logic, making sure that we can actually change to the different rooms, and we're going to start looking at connecting all the dots to get to a point where we can go into the hangar and start up our level. And then we're going to start looking at, okay, what are all the in-between things that we're missing? You know, the fact that there is no briefing. So what are we going to do about the briefing? There's no configuration of the mission. You know, I can't select the ship. I can't select the layout of the ship. We need to figure out, okay, what are the ingredients that we need to complete that? Between missions, we are going, you know, from one place in the carrier to another, and we need to be able to interact with NPCs. How's that going to work? I have no idea at this point in time. We will figure it out when we get there. So yeah. I think the Godot export is indeed simple. Yeah, except for the Android one, there's a bunch of setup. But again, like I said, once you've done the setup, it's easy again. So until Google changes something again. Again, thank you all for watching. I hope you, for whoever this is still daytime, I hope you have a great day. For everybody like you know, in the same situation as me, good night. Hope you sleep well, and hopefully I will catch you all next Friday. Thanks for watching, and till next time.